Are you all set? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen joint budget hearings on the fiscal 2013 Town of Fairfield budget. I'd ask you to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'm going to ask Margaret Mary Fitzgerald of the Education Administration to lead us in the pledge tonight. It's come to my attention that she's just announced her retirement to the school district. I don't know whether they're applauding your leaving or your years of service, that works. But on behalf of this board, we really want to thank you for your work and effort. We've enjoyed working with you for all these years. You've been great at following up on all our questions and been very responsive to our needs. So thank you very much for all your years of service.
So thank you.
Yeah.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right.
That's for me.
One programming note from this evening, Mr. Brown sends his sincere regrets. He actually fell ill today, and he's calling in sick. We hope he gets better soon. He's promised that he'll be watching this on videotape, as well as perhaps emailing me some prearranged questions that he had. So if I check for that later, you'll know why. Tonight we're in public executive session, or rather in public session to hear the Board of Education budget, the Health and Welfare Services budget, and the private school bus transportation budget. I know the superintendent has a brief presentation that he wants to give to us. Tonight is the night for public comment on the Board of Education budget. The next evening, when we will discuss this later in the budget cycle, there will be no public comment, but there is public comment this evening on the Board of Education schedule. Do any of my colleagues or members of the Board of Selectmen have any comments they'd like to make? You guys all set? Great. Thank you very much. Dr. Title, welcome. Ms. Iacono, welcome.
Thank you.
Do you want to say anything first? Or?
No, I'll let you. I'll let you.
Yes, the vote, right?
Yeah, I think you
Okay.
probably want to
Yep, okay.
change.
He's been dying to tell us to do that for years.
Right.
Do we have a pamphlet to follow along with, or no?
I think, Gary, you have some smaller versions of this for the, yeah, it's more, it won't capture the
Grandeur.
fun pictures that we put in this year. We will post this presentation on our website tomorrow morning for people that would like to study it further. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I think it's important that everybody understand not just our budget, but what we do with it and what the results are. So I'd like to start out, and we did some updating of some of the slides we used last year to show you that basically this operating budget allows us to offer a comprehensive and rigorous program of academics, athletics, arts, and co-curricular activities. That's what we use the money for. So I'm going to give you an overview of the program and some of the sample courses and programs we offer, some student achievement indicators, participation indicators about the results, get into some of the significant influences on the budget for 2012-13 and some of the program and service changes that are included in here. So I'll go fairly quickly through this. This will give you an idea of the breadth and depth of our instructional program. That's the heart of what we do. English and social studies, obviously we have a comprehensive core program, but we offer quite a number of electives at the high school level. You'll see scattered throughout these first few slides a number of advanced placement courses. These are of tremendous value to the families and in our community. As you'll see later, our students do incredibly well on those, and that allows students to place out of entry-level college courses, get college credit, and a whole host of other benefits. So that's all part of what we offer. In math and science, you could see the APs there, and some other high-end courses, multivariable calculus that I'm sure you all had at one point. Fortunately, don't need multivariable calculus to follow the budget. Maybe some probability and statistics, but that's about it. You know, it's a very impressive array of offerings, which I think is part of the expectation of a high-quality school system, particularly in Fairfield County. We offer 5 languages at the high school level, despite cutting back last year in the world language in grades 4, 5, and 6. Our Spanish instruction does begin in grade 4 and through grade 5 and grade 6. And grade 7 and 8, then students have a choice of French or Spanish. And then when they get to the high school level, in Spanish and French, because they've had it at the middle school, they actually can get to 6 levels in Spanish and French, where the other languages that start only in the high school, they can go to 4 levels. Although our Latin program, which is growing, actually has an AP component to it. So in the world we're sending our kids into, this is critical. Art and music, of course, we know this is an area where we get to demonstrate our outcomes to people. Way down at the bottom, you can't see, our strings instruction begins in grade 4, band in grade 5, and music technology in grade 6. So we have quite the arts program here, and people are very, very proud of it. And obviously, this budget continues that program and enhances it, in fact. On some of the other elective areas, you could see there, a wide range of courses. Some of them begin in the middle school, family consumer science, tech ed. In fact, we're going to have the tech ed budget, technology budget presented this spring to the Board of Ed, and it will be wonderful. You'll see some of the woodwork that comes out of the high schools. It's just amazing what kids can do. So we're truly offering, a comprehensive high school program. These are other program areas that we're responsible for, and offer, quite a nice array of programs there, beginning with our preschool program, our special ed program, and moving all the way through in the other areas that you see there. Our student participation in extracurricular, co-curricular activities, these were updated for this year's figures. We know athletics are popular. We learned that last year. You can see the number of students participating each season in athletics, the number of students participating in high school music, in the clubs and service organizations. The Townwide Art Show is unbelievable. These programs win lots of awards. And that's a critical part of what we offer here as well. It's not just an extra, it's a critical part. Some results of this, so we're going to go quickly through some numbers. This is, last year we gave you the 5-year changes on our CMT and CAP scores. So this updates that to the most recent 5 years. What you're going to see through all this is we are constantly double digits ahead of the state average in all areas here, sometimes 20 or 25 percentage points ahead of the state. And in many cases, even though we started a relatively high figure 5 years ago, the numbers have gone up. Not all of them, and there's not that there isn't work to be done. If it doesn't say 100 up there, we're not finished. But I think that overall, our standardized test scores show our kids are doing pretty well across the board here. Some areas are better than others, some show greater gains than others, but overall, it's been a pretty successful run here in terms of standardized outcome measures. They're not the only thing, but they're the currency of the realm these days. That's grades 3 and 4, grades 5 and 6. I mean, some of these really stand out. If you look at 6th grade reading as an example, 6th grade actually across the board. The 6th grade reading and math, not only are they high, but they've gone up quite a bit. You look at 5th grade math, up in the high 80s in terms of percentage goal. And 7th and 8th grade, we've got some hitting 90 on there as well, and you've got the state down in the 60s. So you can see the results there. Capped, best area on the capped, actually, relatively speaking, is actually science, which has seen a nice gain. The one area, well, we're still 20 points ahead of the state. We haven't been able to make any big moves on has been reading at the high school level. You got those 8th grade numbers way up there. The high school is still well ahead of the state, but, there's work to be done. Writing has made some substantial gains. But again, the capped is much more difficult to achieve goal than the CMT, so you can't really compare percentage of kids at goal on the CMT with the capped. Capped is much more difficult to do. So that's why you really have to look at the comparison to the state average as sort of a metric to see how we're doing there. So those are some of the standardized. Now the advanced placement tests, there's nothing but good news on this slide. 11 years ago, 314 kids were in AP courses, and 227 AP tests were taken. And kids did well. 83% of them got a 3 or better. 3 is generally will place you out of college courses. 3 is considered a benchmark. A test is scored on 1 to 5. Fast forward to 2011, and we have 4 times as many kids taking AP courses, almost 5 times as many AP tests taken, and yet the kids' scores are actually better. So, and we're always up there in the state with the percentage of kids taking AP courses in the different rankings. This has been a real success story here, getting more kids to achieve at the AP level. So SAT results over the 5 years show, well above the state averages, and for this 5-year period, gains. Sample of the colleges and universities, I mean, we get kids into the whole range of colleges. And, if your alma mater is not up there, then we made a strategic mistake. So I'll have to do for next year, find out where all the selectmen and Board of Finance went to college and make sure their college is up there. Right? So anyway, it's a sampling. We couldn't put them all up there. But you could see, right? So I don't know. We covered this. We did not cover the Board of Finance. So we'll move along. Okay. So budget-wise, as I approach this budget, once again, while we're here to advocate for the needs of the school system, we know there are fiscal realities, and so that's what we tried to do. That's what I tried to do when I put it together. I think that's what the board did when it reviewed my budget. This program I just described to you, we want to preserve that. We do have nice class sizes. They're not too big, not too small. It's kind of like the 3 bears. But there's nothing in here that increases or decreases dramatically anything with class sizes. Wherever possible, where we put some additional programs in, if we could offset that with savings elsewhere, we did. You'll see that with the elementary special ed staffing model as an example. We're continuing to invest in maintenance and technology upgrades. It's something we did not reduce last year in the budget. That is a very short-sighted reduction. You just end up having to fill the hole later, and so we're continuing the investment there. The big area in technology, one of the big areas in technology is a new student management system. We needed to address enrollment changes. You'll see those numbers later, but basically the high school enrollment is going to go up fairly dramatically. We need to address that with more staff, but the elementary enrollment is projected to decline, and so we've addressed that by reducing the number of elementary classroom teachers. So we're addressing the enrollment changes. If it goes up, we add. If it goes down, we subtract. We don't just roll everything forward. Where we can, and we started some of this last year, aligning the budget to the actual costs. Remember last year how we were perpetually overspent the special education line, and we said we just got to put some money into this and bite the bullet, so we align it up. Let's not play games with it. And it's worked out because this year we don't have to go there and buck up the special education line. This year we've got a couple lines like that that we need to deal with. And our instructional initiatives to improve our program, we need to continue to provide resources for those, and so there's some increases there. So those were the big priorities. The enrollment by the numbers, and we took pre-K out of this because we made some changes to pre-K this year and increased the number of kids, and that's really within our control. So the apples-to-apples comparison is K to 12. So the current year K-12 enrollment, 10,157, growing. So about 130 more than it was in 2010. Projecting next year, 37 fewer kids at elementary, 14 more at middle. The biggest classes are in grades 5, 6, 7, and 8. So 6, 7, and 8 are still large. There's a slight increase there. But the high school, you can see that's where all the action is. That big 8th grade class is starting to move in, and you're going to see this plus 117 figure coming at you for probably each of the next 3 years after this. We need to deal with it. We need to deal with it staff-wise. So the total change is 94 children for a total for next year of 10,251. That's the number we build our budget off of. So in terms of how the enrollment translates into bodies, we're budgeting 3 fewer elementary classroom teachers and 6 additional classroom teachers at the high school level because of the enrollment. I'm going to move. We're almost done. Mr. Flynn said quickly. I'm trying. So the significant influences on this budget, I mean, they're not all negative influences or pressures up. They're just, the enrollment obviously affects our budget because we're a labor-intensive business. More kids means we need more staff, generally. The teacher's salary, you know, the new contract has a 2% increase on average for teachers for next year, so that's built in. There were some cost savings in the new teacher's contract that somewhat offset that 2%. Those are the areas. They got quite a bit of discussion as the contract went through for approval to the RTM, but all of these in their own way helped keep the increase down. We have a fairly sizable increase in our transportation budget. Some of that's enrollment driven, some of that's just the routes, and some of that's the contract increases, and we can get into more of that if you'd like. The custodial overtime is one of those areas that we've been overrunning it for years. We got to face up to it, and we need to put the right numbers in there. And there's some things we are going to try to do going forward to reduce that number, but some of it is just built in, and it's going to happen every year, and it's going to snow every year, and we're going to need to clean the buildings in the summer to get them ready for school, and there's not that much we can do about it. So it's time to take our medicine there. Lower electricity rates, the town had this, I think Mr. Tetro pointed this out. This is a substantial savings to the board, in the neighborhood of about $700,000. And so we reduced our budget by that amount. And there are no funding cliffs here. Remember in the past couple of years you probably heard about grant money running out, or we had an overage, so we used some grant money, now we got to fill it up. Well, we didn't do any of that. We didn't take any grants and use them for ongoing expenses. We didn't make any cuts in the budget that just had to be filled up this coming year. So there are no funding cliffs, so we have to go in and say, you know, the ARRA money ran out, now we're stuck. All that's done. We took care of that. Again, last year we took our medicine. This year it pays off. Some program and service changes that are in here. We're proposing a different way of providing special education services at the elementary level that involves more certified teachers and fewer paraprofessionals. So that's in the budget. Last year, you might remember, we put in a math support model at the elementary schools, and this extends that model to the middle schools and the high schools for kids, because we still have kids in need of math support at those levels, and we presently do not have much support for kids at those levels. We have part-time clerical support at the elementary schools in the 9 schools that don't have it, for customer service, for safety, for office coverage in the afternoon. On a per-school basis, it's like $11,000, but you multiply it by 9 and it's real money. But I think it's a very cost-effective way to handle that particular need at the elementary schools. We've been marching through and updating our curriculum, several curricular areas. To implement that fully, we need some funds for textbook and other materials. We have some maintenance needs that we need to start to put some additional funds into. So we have money in here for an additional licensed plumber. We have 1 plumber to handle the entire school system. As a result, plumbing problems tend to not get taken care of very effectively and lead to bigger problems. So we're asking for funding for 1 licensed plumber, and we're going to extend our preventive maintenance program to 3 additional schools that were not part of it, and some additional preventive maintenance on the building envelopes. In light of our recent issues, we thought this is a good investment. The school climate legislation, otherwise known as bullying, we're trying to reframe it as school climate because it's not just bullying. But despite the state's insistence that this is a mandate that requires no additional money, they're actually wrong. The new student information system, this was in the operational audit. Our student information system is antiquated, homegrown, is a hodgepodge of things, causes us all kinds of issues, and we decided to put this into the operating budget rather than seek any kind of capital funding for this. It's a big-ticket item, about $250,000. The other parts of technology, wireless technology is not currently available in all our schools. It is where we're headed, and mostly this is the elementary schools and some at the middle schools. And English language learners are becoming a bigger part of our population. It's appropriate that we're here the day after we had a diversity night because the community is getting more diverse, and in the number of languages, the number of kids that speak and who come in with English not as their first language, and we haven't really addressed that particularly well, and so this is a small step towards addressing that issue. So for all of that, all those improvements, we end up with this change in the staffing. Remember, 94 additional kids. The next staffing is we're actually proposing a budget with fewer staff members for next year. So this budget has enabled us to deliver this program, and for all of this, you get all of these things, and it's only a 2.6% increase, which we really think, and the board, I know, when they approved it this way, is a good balance. There are lots of things that people could have advocated, did advocate to put in here, and we really held the line because we know the times are still tough, and so we appreciate your time and consideration, and at this point, we'll turn it back over to Mr. Flynn, Mr. Tetro. Take this out, or?
Thank you, Dr. Title.
Okay.
Appreciate the presentation.
Yep.
I could actually sell some Amway product with that.
You try it, right. But there's more. Steak knives.
Ginsu.
Ginsu. Right?
And if you approve it before midnight tonight.
That's right. Right.
Exactly, we'll give you a discount.
How much?
I just want, a very slight one, exactly. I just wanted to say on behalf of the board, we did approve this unanimously. And I did ask central office to go back and do a little bit of budget history, and to our knowledge, this is the lowest budget proposal that we've brought forth in recent history. So we hope you're pleased.
What's recent history?
I asked them to go back at least 10 years, and I think they went back even farther.
I think it goes back to the 50s.
Yeah.
Is that right? Mr. Tetro, did you have any comments? I know you've been through this budget. You had your own recommendation to one adjustment to the budget, so I wanted to give you time.
Yes, I recommended one change right off the, this budget was put together before we got the update from our actuarial consultant for pension. And so we went back, and I'm recommending one change to this that reflects the reduction in the annual required contribution to the pension fund. And it's approximately $660,000. Mr. Hiller, I'm going to turn to you for the exact number.
612,525.
And that would reduce the 2.6% increase that appeared on that recent slide to 2.18% increase.
And that's the number, in fact, that's before us now, is that correct? How does that work? I can't remember it is.
That is the first selectman's
That's
recommendation.
the first selectman's recommendation, right? Okay.
So I think to your question, Mr. Flynn, I think that technically still has to be approved by the
Yeah.
Board of Selectmen
Right, exactly.
before it goes to the Board of Finance.
Right.
That
Thank
would
you.
be correct, because the board number would still be the operative number that's
Right,
before you.
because that's the one that's been voted on. Dr. Title, do you have any comments on that adjustment? Or
No, that makes sense. I mean, we really are just a pass-through on that pension number. Mr. Hiller and Ms. Munsell work with the actuaries, and they give them the figure, and we slide it in. So my perspective, that seems to be harmless. I think it's just a technical point. The board would actually have to vote on it,
Right.
you know, when they make their adjustments, but
But it doesn't affect anything
it has no
else in the
effect. I
budget.
mean, It doesn't affect any of our programs or services or staffing. It's really just a contribution to a fund. So it would be fine.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of getting lower electricity rates. It just, in this case, we found out about the lower rates after the Board of Ed had reviewed the budget rather than before.
Great.
Right. Had we known this lower figure, this would be the number in our budget.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for that. I'll turn it over now to my colleagues and open it up for any questions. And Dr. Tittle, feel free to bring anyone to the table necessary to answer the questions. Anybody want to kick it off? Mr. Bolito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, everyone. On the transportation piece, you mentioned that there's new contracts, or the current contracts are expiring. I'm just curious in terms of what your expectations are with the new contracts going forward, what impact that the end of grandfathering will have on the routes and on service, and just kind of where we're going with transportation over
Sure.
the next couple of years.
The current bus contract has one more year to run the next year, and it has a 3% cost escalated built into it. So that's part of the reason why this transportation line's going up. We are in the process right now of working with the transportation consultant to bid that contract into the open market, so we can get it through the town bodies in time for what will be the 2013, 2014 fiscal year. And it is a competitive market for transportation. So we hope we can get overall a better deal, but you won't know till you bid it. So for this particular budget, the transportation contract does not, we got the last year of it. So it's hard to forecast. We do have one more year of the grandfathering. So we would estimate that, on an apples-to-apples comparison, we would be taking out, the equivalent of 6 or 7 buses off the streets when that happens. So we expect to see a savings. We will see a savings in the number of buses on the road in 2013-14 versus 12-13. So the grandfathering, this is the first year of it, and next year is the second year, and it'll just be the 8th graders next year. But still got to run the buses. So that will have a positive effect. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that the combination of taking out the grandfathering and bidding it, that we might do better with transportation in 13-14 than we're going to do in 12-13.
Sounds like a reasonable expectation. One other question for now. On the additional part-time clerical staff for after school, obviously some schools have after-school programs, like North Stratfield has a Tiger's Den. I think Jennings has an aftercare program. So those schools, I would think, don't have a particular need for clerical staff afterwards. But I'm assuming you're talking about the schools that do not currently offer aftercare programs.
It's not so much that. I mean, part of this is the after hours when the secretary goes home, the full-time secretary goes home at 4 o'clock and kids are returned on buses.
Does that happen
There's nobody
often?
there. It happens periodically,
Really?
and when it does happen, it's very problematic.
I can imagine. Sure.
The other thing is that there are after-school programs in there, and there's nobody in the office. People that are running those programs, are not necessarily school employees that have access to that. It's problematic. The bigger piece of this is the zaniness of the elementary school office from 12:30 to 3:30, with parents coming in, parents calling, lunches being dropped off, dismissal slips, bus route changes. They're one-armed paper hangers in there. And so, part of this is, in my view, a health and safety issue in terms of after school and having coverage and kids being returned. But some of this is just trying to come up with a cost-effective solution to keeping those busy offices running well for the customers.
Right. Now, do you envision it being a case where you have essentially a second shift coming in when the bell rings and basically you have a new shift taking over after school, or is it
No.
supporting what you already have during the day and keeping them longer?
No, it would be depending on the school and exactly what their needs were, it would be sort of an afternoon shift that might run, say, 12:30 to 4:30 or 1 to 5. So there's an overlap because that afternoon, right through the dismissal hour, I mean, dismissal in elementary school was quite interesting.
I'm familiar with it.
So having the second person in the office, we don't want to start them at 4 o'clock or, that's not the idea. They're really needed. So could be something like a 1 o'clock to 4:30 kind of arrangement. Would be a clerical position similar to the one that we have now, which is used in the mornings.
Right.
To help out with that, craziness. So it'd be a second person coming in 19 hours a week, and it's very very cost effective on a per person basis.
Okay. That's all for now. Thank you.
Sure. Any other follow-ups on that, Ms. McCarthy-Vahey?
Actually, no follow-up on that, but back to transportation, if I may, for a moment. And perhaps this might be a question for Mr. Hiller to help with as well. Just looking at the revenue numbers for the town, the state monies coming in for public transportation and non-public transportation. And I just wondered, Mr. Hiller, if you could help me match those up with the budget book that we have. I noticed, for example, for non-public transportation, the numbers differ from the 5384 to what we have in here is 5825. It's just a minor difference. Just want to clarify that.
I have with me this evening the document presented by the Office of Policy and Management from the state based on the governor's budget. And
Page on, Kristen.
I'm on page 18.
on non-public transportation,
Oh, in here, in the page 6. I'm on page 6 in the education budget. And then page 18.
non-public
in-
transportation, they're predicting $5,756 for public transportation, $18,128. And both of those are based on formulas which are brought forward by the state. Clearly, it's not a lot of money.
I think I might be able to help with this. These numbers move around almost on a monthly basis. So when we did this, the state may have listed this with the numbers we have. By the time he went to do his budget, a couple months later, they very easily could change. I mean, we just got an email today with some numbers on the current year. So these grants are always being rejiggered by the Office of Policy and Management based on some arcane set of rules they have. So that could be what happens. We do our budget so many more months in advance than the town does that the revenue numbers can move around. Not that
I'll
I'm
refer to
excusing
a
anything,
kind of
I'm
a
just trying to
footnote
help
here.
explain it.
Since, for example, in the non-public school transportation, what I will call their footnotes, it's, since projected local expenditure estimates form the basis of the grant calculations for FY13, actual revenue may vary significantly from the estimates shown based on the results of the final estimates as expenditures as audited. And there's probably similar language on the public, virtually just as actual revenue may vary significantly. Exact same language on the public school transportation comment.
Okay. Thank you. May I just ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Mr. Chair. So just to make sure that I'm just matching from one book to the other in terms of what I'm looking at, revenue to the town on page 6 here, the non-public transportation, excuse me, the public transportation is the school transportation grant. It's listed that way in our budget book. Just different language, just trying to make sure I'm looking at the same thing.
It's listed in the
places.
town budget book under state grants. There's really two listings on page 17 of the town book, school transportation grant, bottom of page 17. And the non-public school transportation grant is among the state grants primarily listed on page 18.
So just in those two locations, and that's it?
I'm sorry?
They're in those two locations, and that's it, so that's the match. All right, thank you, I'm satisfied.
Okay. If there's no other questions on transportation, I have a follow-up I'd like to ask. Mary, go ahead.
I just wanted to check, how many buses are budgeted for this year? Is it the same as last year?
This year compared to last year, the current year we're in, or the,
The budget we're looking at and the current year we're in?
no, we are increasing the number of buses for next year. But I don't know the number off the top of my head. There's a couple more we have to add. Do we know?
2.
John? 2? Couple was right, okay. Got the answer. That was transportation for 500, okay. 2 buses.
And is that
Right.
for like the middle school level or is it high school? Or-
It's the whole scene because
Okay.
these buses run multiple tiers. And they also get tied into the private school transportation, so it's not attributable to one element. It could also be where the kids happen to be located and the length of the runs that we can, to get the kids. So there's a lot of factors that go into it,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, my own follow-up on this item. If you turn to page 15 in our book, under Category 5, Transportation, you have a $563,000 increase in transportation year over year, which is 8%. It's in this book. Okay. Bob, did you find it? Yeah. Okay.
Right.
It's an 8% increase year over year. So last year, or the current year that we're in, the current fiscal year, is when the grandfathering situation due to the redistricting started, right?
Year we're in, correct.
Right. So that's already accounted for
Correct.
within the current budget. So here's what I'm having problems with. If I heard you correctly, and I might not have, the rate increase was 3%.
Correct.
Okay. The volume increase is 2 buses.
Right.
How did 2 buses
Cost that much
increase the
money?
entire budget by 5% when the rate
Because-
increase is only 3?
Right. Because you're looking at budget to budget. And the actual this year is going to be higher than the budgeted amount because the number of buses are running more runs than we anticipated. Because we pay not just per bus, but we pay depending on how many runs each bus makes. So that's part of it. So if for example, if we have a bus that does a single run, we pay a certain price. That same bus in service does 2 more loops. So what we had to do is we had to add some runs to the existing buses to pick up all of our kids.
What's accounting for that? What was wrong with the original budget? I'm not trying to,
Right,
Yeah.
no, I think it
Not
was,
attacking here, I'm questioning.
well, I'll have to say that budgeting for transportation in a normal year is difficult to figure out. Just the fact that kids move around from the time you do the budget, kids move in and out of town, and so forth. That's with no other changes. Adding to the fact that we made 2 major changes to our bus schedule this year. Grandfathering was one of them. And that's a whole estimate about where the kids are, who's going to take it and who's not going to take it. The other thing we did, if you recall, and was to the positive, was we changed the high school start times and did an estimate over what the savings would be for that. So we had 2 major shifts in the bus grid that had to be accounted for, plus the kids moving in and out, plus what happened is some of the private schools monkeyed around with their start times, which impacted our buses, And some of this is also special education costs for unanticipated kids in special education and runs and so forth. So it's not all the regular ed as part of it.
So what is the year-over-year actual difference? Because obviously the 8% is not accurate.
Right. So if we find that in the budget, we have an estimate for what we think we're going to spend this year on transportation. If you give me a second, we can go to the line.
No, that'd be great.
Yep.
And thank you if I didn't.
Yep. So let's find a transportation. Do you have it? 71?
71?
All right, so you can see here that it looks like we're going to be a couple $100,000 over.
Where am I? I'm sorry.
If you go on page 71,
Yep.
just above the blue stripe, business services,
See it. That's all transportation?
that's all transportation there. So you can see that some of this is special ed transportation, a piece of it,
So it's
Right.
200,000.
special ed, yeah. And we're 200,000 over total just to start. That's sort of the base to start into next year.
But that's still higher than what's that increase? Am I-
That's about 3%. 3% of 7 million is 210,000.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's 3%. 3% for the contract, couple buses, some special,
Is the couple of buses 2%? Can we break that out,
Yeah.
just so that we can see
Yeah,
that?
a couple buses, each bus is about $60,000.
I'm glad we have a superintendent who's so good with math.
Yeah, right. Right, right, right.
620 I have. Okay,
Yeah,
close enough.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's,
Now, I'm sorry, but I want to go back, and I don't want to belabor a point, but in your discussion about to Mr. Bolito's question, you said something about additional costs related to children having to come back to school? Did you say that? Did I hear you?
there's no, yeah, the kids who, like a kindergartner who goes, bus driver goes to drop a kindergartner off, there's no one there, they come back to the school to drop the kid off, there's no one there to deal with it in the
Right.
office. It had to do with the office coverage
Yeah,
question.
right. And then
There's
what
no additional
happens
cost.
On transportation? they
No,
just
there's no
drop 'em
extra
off at
transportation
school?
cost on that, right.
Okay,
That's
that's
not
what
a-
I wanted to say.
Yeah,
I
that's not a
wanted to-
transportation cost
Right.
increase, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said that happens relatively frequently?
Well, it happens periodically. It depends on the school, the day, the parents, the weather.
Send you a bill.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
this was a very nervous point for the elementary principals. I mean, really felt that this was an important area for
I
them.
can understand that.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions from board members? Mr. Brockville? Different subject, is that okay? And does anybody have a follow-up on mine? No. Mr. Brockville, please.
A question for you is related to I don't have the book open here, the hiring of the staff for the end of the day, additional staff, you said possibly for security.
Clerical, yeah.
One question I have is, and this is a personal coming from my own kids, but why don't we have the libraries, and the reason I'm asking specifically is if you're hiring people to be there later anyway, the libraries, particularly at the high school level, open late into the, early evening so that kids can stay and who want to and study.
That's a
Or
different,
keep
that's a
out of
different
tr-
issue.
Or keep out of trouble. Well, it's a
Right.
different issue, but the reason I'm bringing it up is because it seems there might be some way to mesh, in other words, if there is cost issues, which I'm sure there is, for not keeping them open, if you're thinking about hiring people to be there for after-school
We're talking
reasons.
about the elementary schools only that this applies to.
this is only elementary schools,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Right, this does
Okay.
not apply to the high schools.
Okay, so I'll ask a separate question. Why don't we keep the libraries open late in the day?
Because when you cut a budget, $2.825 million, something has to go.
Well, did that go?
And
Was
that went.
That went.
Part of it. It went from 4 days a week open to 2 days a week.
Right.
You know, like, you asked me last year, what would happen if this budget cut happened? And I said there would be pain, it would be noticed. But we kept it away from the core areas. And kids' access to the library after school was one of those things. And everybody took some of the pain, and we
Okay,
got-
the reason I brought it up, you answered partially.
Just opened
Yeah.
the door for
Yeah,
me
yeah,
to,
I don't want to actually start.
talk to you
a-
about,
yeah, we
the
can-
budget cut.
Right, right. I don't
That's
actually want
what
to start
happened.
a theoretical question. My real question was because I thought you were hiring people across the school
Yeah,
system.
okay, good. No,
Right.
no, this
So
is-
you're saying this is elementary school?
Yes, only at the elementary schools, and 2 schools already have it. The 2 bigger schools already have it.
Right.
And so this brings equity to the other 9.
Okay.
Ms. Leclerc?
Okay. I want to follow up on what Mr. Brockfield just brought up about closing the libraries in the high schools. They're only open like at Fairfield Ludlow Monday and Tuesday, and 2 days at Ward. And I think it's terrible because you said how many kids are involved in after-school programs at the high schools. Well, they don't all start right away. And that used to be when the kids would go to the libraries. Anyone involved in honor societies have a requirement for tutoring, and that's where they used to do their tutoring. And kids who don't have access to computers at home could get their homework done. So I think it's really a foolish cut that you made, and you should consider finding that funds to put that back.
Well,
Um,
you know,
It's-
there's
it's a painful
priorities
one.
and there's priorities, right? I mean,
Yeah, and the board made the cut, so I hear your sentiment, but something had to go, and that was one of the things, so.
Okay.
Mr. Bolito?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the breakdown by department, and you break it down by school in terms of the kind of the big picture of what's going to where in the schools, I noticed that some schools are showing an increased budget year over year, and some are showing a decline. Like, for example, McKinley is down 167,784. North Stratfield's down 31 grand and change. Osborne Hill's down 97. Riverfield's down 315, if I'm reading that correctly. And then the other elementary schools are all anywhere from a 90 to 150 range in terms of increases. Just big picture, what's driving that in terms of the differences between the schools?
right. So that's largely a function of the teaching staff.
Okay.
Year over year, as the staff moves around, if you've got a younger staff, you're going to spend less money. This year that we're in right now, there were a lot of changes because of the new elementary staffing model. A lot of people changed schools, moved into different positions, and so the same number of staff may be costing substantially less or more than the prior year.
Okay.
And that's really the biggest difference. The best way to see it, and also you might have some schools where enrollment's declining and we're reducing by a person or two, and other places where sections may be going up. So there is a section that shows the staffing year over year, and that's sort of a better way to get a handle on what's happening there. It's a little bit
The reason I asked
later.
was,
Yeah.
it surprised me with McKinley specifically that I would have expected, exactly to your point, that, their staffing would be down, and yet their teaching staff was up from 36.1 to 39, and it's showing a change in that line item of 31,000 less. Now, does that speak to the fact that you have younger staff there?
Yeah, as people moved around, we created some positions in the district, math science teachers and so forth. So if you had a veteran teacher, say at McKinley, who became a math science teacher in another school, and that person was replaced with a beginning teacher, then you would save money there. So that's really a fact of just people moving around.
Okay.
It's, we keep the same class size guidelines as we always have. We're staffing exactly the same as we always have staffed. You can get some idea of what happened by looking at the estimated expenditure versus the budgeted number. So if you see a budgeted number and then you see the estimated expenditure is really high,
Right.
that tells you that in reality, That's really what we're spending on that school.
So there's an adjustment there.
Yeah, so that, and then the following year, then you might get another adjustment. There also can be occasionally at McKinley, you might move a teacher in and out of a grant. That can affect McKinley. It doesn't affect the overall budget, but just by the way things fall, McKinley is subject to that because they are the recipient of our Title I funds, and
Right.
so that can happen there.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Mrs. McCarthy-Vahey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is related to McKinley, and in a broader context, the improved English language learner services. Can you talk a little bit more specifically about that? And I am thinking about McKinley because it's the school that has the most languages in our district. I can't remember how many languages are at McKinley now?
The answer is? 38.
38. So
Thank you,
where will
Anna.
those English language learner changes be happening, and will there be additional support for the students at McKinley School?
We can find that in here. 37. I will say, first of all, that this is a bit of a down payment on a larger look at that program. We have a bit of a task force at work at looking at the whole English language learner program. This is a bit of a tweak of trying to align staff to where the kids really are. So English language learners, let's see, McKinley is going up from 2.2 to 2.7, so 0.5 of a teacher at McKinley. And if you sort of look down the list, you can see that's where, of all the elementary schools, they do have the most staff. Not every school is seeing an increase in English language learners, but it's in places you might not think. If you look just at the top there at Burr, it's going from a 0.4 to a 0.6. This was in an effort to align the staff to where the kids actually are. This is one of those staffing things that it's just always been done a certain way, and the staff were sort of aligned in a certain way, and we hadn't really looked at it too much. So I think the overall increase is a 0.8 or something like that. I think you're going to see a larger proposal along English language learners for the following year. I'm just signaling a coming attraction.
Okay, thank you. May I follow up again?
Please.
So thank you for that, and I'm glad to hear about that. And just wondering if there's anything else involved in that improved service in terms of staff. Are there any other expenses included in the budget that are part of that tweak?
I think that's it. I think it's just staffing.
Okay.
But let me check behind me.
Do we have anything else? 28 or something?
Okay, so we're going to direct some of our professional development resources towards English language learners, but it's not causing a bump in the professional development line.
Okay, thank you.
4.1. Other questions? Staying on the staff, can we go to page 17 quickly? Thank you for this. It breaks it out nicely.
This was Doreen's enhancement, I should point out. First
Thank-
year doing this budget.
There you go.
So if
very
you
well.
like it, thank her. If you don't like it, it was the superintendent's idea.
I'll let you know in a couple minutes.
Okay.
I'm looking at a couple different lines. The part-time employment line, which is object 129, does that specifically relate to the additional headcount you were talking about to cover the after hours?
That's part of it. That's only 112,000 of it.
Okay, so what else is in there?
That's got to be custodial overtime. That's the biggest chunk, 240,000.
Why is that in part-time as opposed to in custodial staff?
Who knows?
Probably not the right answer.
Because that's where it's always been? I don't know. Well, because, the custodial staff, I think when you budget for the staff, you budget their regular salary. And so since you don't really know who's going to work the overtime, you budget a lump sum for part-time, and then it gets parceled out to the individual people.
Yeah, I get
So I think that's the rationale for it, unless Margaret Mary has a better answer. Okay. In other words, when you build the budget, you build it with a real person with a real salary, and
Could we just get a breakdown of that then? And Mr. Polito, you got a follow-up on this? point?
Yeah, on the narrative about part-time employment, I don't see any mention of custodial. It
Right.
mentions the 112 for the part-time clerical, but then also mentions a second part-time clerk for each of the 9 elementary schools and a
Keep going, Rob. It's on the second bullet after
oh,
that.
that's it. Okay, I got you. Thank
Down
you.
there.
All right, I got you.
Right. And that is, so you actually can get some more detail around that in the detailed part of the budget.
Yeah.
So just let me find you the page. That's it. Part-time hourly? So 58? Looks like page 58 has more detail around that.
Yeah, I was looking at this earlier. All it says is, where is it? Now I've lost it.
Yeah, there's,
So I was
it goes
looking at
on.
this earlier.
Yeah, there's,
It's not there. I saw it somewhere else.
let's keep going. So part-time employment starts on page 53, actually, and just goes for several pages. The custodial overtime piece of that is on page 58 under Business Services 64 in the middle of the page. Third line down, evening subs overtime.
So the changes in, there's clerical support, lunch aides.
Now, that's the biggest chunk of it,
Yeah, but that's only 100.
240.
Okay. Teacher sub salaries, is that right?
It does look like the webmaster was reclassified into that spot, which is making that look bigger than it is, because that's not different from what we've had. We didn't increase our webmaster time.
Where should the webmaster be? Or
So
where's the-
under 65,
yeah, no,
technology services
Yeah, where was it prior?
shows it as a $30,000 hourly, almost like it's new,
Yeah.
but it's not new. So it was probably over in the technology department somewhere. Do we know where that was charged before? That's not an addition. Contracted services before. So that's a part-time position, so that was more reclassification of an expense as opposed to a new expense. It's not a new expense.
Okay.
And
On the, I'll come back with that.
yeah,
when I
the
have-
custodial
once I go
overtime
through
is
it.
the biggest part of this. I mean, when you really get down to it.
And what's driving that? Is it use of the buildings, or
Yeah,
was it under budgeted,
there's actually
or what's going on?
multiple facets to that,
Okay,
some of which are controllable and some of which are not.
okay.
The use of the buildings for which we don't get reimbursed by the users is a piece of that. And some of that is probably not really changeable because these are school-sponsored activities or governmental bodies using it or school-affiliated programs and so forth. So that is not likely to happen. Another big, which we call non-billable time. It's in about 100,000 of it probably is that. You know, if we wanted to start charging, you know, Board of Finance for running the meetings after 11 o'clock, then, you know, we could probably reduce that number a little. Then we have another big chunk, which I think we can start to get a handle on. Yeah, thank you. We can start to get a handle on through contract negotiations that are upcoming, which is right now, the practice of the district is that when a custodian is absent, if we decide to fill that time, we fill that by hiring an existing staff member and paying them overtime. Now, we don't fill every absence, but if we have to, that's the practice. And until we get into the negotiations room, and that contract is up right now. There's no assurance we can get an agreement on that, but that's something we can look at. So the, what we call fill absences is a big, that's probably that is the biggest part of it. And then we have, of course, snow removal, right? Hurricane cleanup, whatever. That's a good 75, 80,000 a year. There's almost nothing you can do about that.
Yep.
We're going to look to do a couple things. We're going to see if we can't get an agreement to have a shutdown, possibly between Christmas and New Year's, where we have minimal staffing in the buildings, no reservations, nothing goes on. Custodial staff would take a vacation that week. We wouldn't fill any absences. That would use a bunch of vacation days that we would otherwise have to fill for. But again, that has to be worked on collectively. And so it's an issue that we want to address. But it's been fantasy budgeting up to this point on that line. And you can look at the history of it. So that's really there's some other small parts. We do summer cleaning. Our buildings are in such use by the town for so much of the summer that to get the buildings ready for kids, we have to pay people overtime to come in for the last 2 weeks to get them ready. And that's fine. The buildings should be used by the town. They're the town's buildings. But there's a consequence to that. So that all sort of plays into it.
Okay. One other item I noticed, and I was looking at it from a comparative basis. Same page, if you look at certified support staff, and then you look at secretarial clerical staff, okay? And it looks like certified support staff is going up by a full-time equivalent of about 0.6, right? And that increase is a total of $112,000 rounding year over year on a $6.2 million line, which is not a big amount, okay?
Right.
But then you look at the secretarial clerical staff, and it's a $3.2 million line, let's say, rounding again. And it's going up by 4%, yet the number of bodies are remaining flat. So why is secretarial clerical going up by 4%? And it just sticks out, like I said, it's $130,000. So not a huge number, but it sticks out when you compare it to the certified support that's not going up by nearly the same percentage.
On the 111 line?
Yeah, the 111 line versus the 103 line. I mean,
Right.
looking at it, the vast majority of your increase is the staffing. So
Sure.
I think we got to get to
Right.
the details of the
Now,
staff.
the certified support staff, that does reflect an increase, the teacher contract increase in there. So the fact that doesn't go up is probably the fact that there's been some significant turnover of staff in that line, because we're not reducing our certified support staff.
No, it's
So-
actually going up by 0.6. So
Right.
the actual number is going up by 0.6.
Right.
The amount is
So that's
very
lo-
small.
Yes.
Specifically when you're looking at a budget line that's half the size,
Right.
going
Right.
up by more, and there's no change in staffing.
Well, that is the only non-certified group that we have a settled contract for next year. So that one actually has a couple percentage point increase in it for a settled contract, as opposed to the others, which have their increases in the wage and benefit reserve.
Yeah, but this is 4%.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
So that's part of it, and I don't know what the answer is to the other,
Yeah.
the other part of it, why it would be going up by 128,000. I'm just looking at it here.
So we said, all right, so we're going to follow up on that
Yeah,
one.
so we'll check on that. I've got that, I don't know if Margaret Mary has any.
And then I guess
They get some of it's just step increases as well. Yeah, I don't see anything.
step increases for
Yeah.
clerical.
The secretaries have steps, the union contract. They're unionized.
It's raising the entire thing by 4%.
No, that would be on top of the general wage increase.
Yeah.
So We'll research it.
Cool.
Yep.
Thank you for that. And then, just to be clear.
Yep.
Just going back for a second, so we have the webmaster that's part of the part-time employment, the 129.
Yep.
Was that not in a salary line at all last year? Okay, so that's why.
Correct.
So it's not part of the infotech support staff line here?
Right.
Okay. So it's going from, for whatever reason, someone who was classified as a consultant to actually a part-time employee?
This is trying to be more upfront about staff. We do count it in our FTEs.
Right.
But it wasn't in a
And
staff
there's legal
line.
requirements, if it
Right.
hits a certain thing, you have to anyway, so I would imagine.
Right, so it was really a cleanup
But this is
maneuver.
not, there's no benefits associated
No
with this
benefits.
position. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have any comments on this area right now? All right, seeing none, anybody, next item. Floor is open for questions. Yes, anything.
Anything.
Absolutely, Mr. Stone, please. Do you have a generator at your house?
I knew that was coming.
There's no generator in the budget.
I know. When we did the, I guess it was last year or 2 years ago, the prismatic study.
Yes.
I just wanted a general comment. They mentioned about taking out or changing or eliminating actually the house systems in the high schools. I
Right.
just wonder if they said there was significant savings, and I know we're not doing that, so I'd just like to hear your comment on that.
Right, it was just a bad idea educationally. We had to extract savings from the high school last year, as we heard. We had to make some tough decisions about that. And so we went a route to get savings that we thought would be not as harmful as unwinding the house system that we think has worked well here for a number of years. We did a pretty thorough look at that after the audit came out, and when I wrote my response, let's say, to that audit, it was actually probably the longest narrative in there, was explaining some of the misconceptions that the audit team had about the roles. That was part of the problem. I think they misconstrued the roles of the different people in the House system. And so we just felt that overall, educationally, I believe that the House system has merit, and that the savings were basically by eliminating positions, which you can do whether you have a House system or not. So basically, it didn't make sense to me educationally to pursue that, but it didn't mean the high school was immune from having to do some service reductions. That's my short answer. Okay.
Mrs. McCarthy-Vehy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, going back for a moment to both the topic of revenues to the town and also the issue of custodial support. Building rentals are coming in lower this year, $38,000, I believe is the number. Yet the cost for upkeep, and you've talked about the use of the buildings is one of the reasons driving the custodial increase. So can you help me with that? Why is that building rental number going down? Is it just that we have more groups using who don't pay for the use of the facilities?
There are a lot of groups that are exempt from paying rental fees. They may pay custodial fees, but the rental fee on top of that, many groups are exempt from that, historically have been exempt. This is just a reflection of what we think the actual is at the time we did this, which was 5 months into the year. So where it might land at the end of the year, could be slightly higher than that. It's hard to say. The actual for the prior year was 45. It's really the mix of groups that use it. You get a couple groups that had paid rentals, they decide not to use it in a given year, that could be the whole difference. So it's really the mix of groups who decide to use the facility. We do take in and offset our custodial fees where we can, and that's reflected in our revenue down under other sources on the next page, custodial fees. So it isn't that we never collect on custodial fees. The breakout is, if it's to reimburse for custodians, the Board of Ed sort of keeps the money and offsets its costs. If it's above and beyond that, if it's for rental fees, then that money goes to the town.
I'm still a little, I guess, so you're saying the answer to my question in terms of why these numbers are going down and our custodial expenses are going up so much is that it's the mix of the groups
Yes.
who are using, and that's the sole answer. It's not that the usage itself is lower.
No.
The mix of paid and unpaid is the answer.
The usage is very high.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Brockfeld.
Thank you. Dr. Tuttle, is there any, you mentioned before that, animatedly, that decisions had to be made last year in the face of the cuts that were made to the budget. Are there any, so now you have 1 year experience with the cuts that you made last year, the discretionary cuts you were forced to make, and now we have a new budget in front of us. Is there any reflection upon what you did last year that's reflected in the budget where you said, you know, hey, maybe that wasn't a good idea and we restored it, or maybe we, you know, is there any changes in the mix from the cuts you were forced to make last year?
Well, here's the thing. By the time we did this budget, we had about September, October, and November's experience with these cuts. Right, so we have not had a year's experience. And some of the cuts initially were causing issues, and we were able to, you know, adjust our staffing to absorb it. And so we think that some of the cuts over time, as we get a full year under our belt, we may, upon reflection next year, say, we've had a year plus 3 months to work with it. We've not really been able to solve it. It's still a nagging problem. We really need to go back in and relook at that and adjust. But some of the cuts, you know, are not in that category. I mean, some of those cuts are just too bad. And, you know, to get back into the budget, they had to compete with everything else. So our priorities were, as I listed, up there. And when you're looking at, say, what you might want to add to your budget for the high school, just hypothetically, to me, the most important thing was to get 6 additional teachers to handle 114 kids. That's costing most of your discretionary money, so to speak. Not that, you know, so everything has to compete for a spot in the budget, and it's tough competition. I'm pretty ruthless about it. And so that, so just because it didn't go back in this year doesn't mean you're never going to see it again.
So the answer partially is that even though we feel like it's been a year, the budget really reflects a much shorter time frame, and you haven't even had a chance really to get a full, okay.
Right, exactly. Really, I mean, like a third of a year.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
One more question, Tom?
Please.
Oh, thank you. Another kind of very top-level question. I noticed in the, this is waiting, I'm going to regret this before I ask it because I'm going to wade into a controversial area. But if you look at, from your presentation before, the enrollment projections, what you see is what some of us spoke about, and I was on the middle school, the Fairfield Woods Middle School thing, so we had a lot of discussion about future enrollments. And so what you see here is obviously you have the high school up 117, that's reality, right? As well, the middle school, we have a minus 37 on the elementary school. And many people, including our former first selectman, were, you know, pretty strong on the fact that there seemed to be a reduction back there, so to speak. So the question I have for you is, because this is not really broken out, there's no real detail here, is there any changes that are more than just a snapshot? In other words, do you see anything going on here that would indicate to you that the decrease of 37 in the elementary school will work its way through? And if that's the case, is there any long-term implications that may not be necessarily a question for this budget, but, you know, if you thought that the enrollment was going to continue dropping, there are things you might not need to do, capital-wise, for example, going forward. So I guess I'm looking for a little more detail on
Well, you remember last year, we did a completely different method of long-term budget projections, and that was the controversy, right? And we hired a whole different firm, they used a whole different methodology. I mean, I have a really good statistical background and eye strain to understand the statistics behind it. But it was a much more complex and robust method to predict enrollment. And in fact, they did a better job of predicting enrollment than our prior vendor had done. They still didn't get it completely right. Kindergarten is still very difficult to predict here. But at this point, we had asked them this year to simply do a one-year update. We did not ask them to do a whole nother 10-year projection. Take your projections for 12-13, the same firm, 12-13, and update it based on the reality that hit us. Right? For example, 800 kindergarten kids came in. They had predicted 760. The prior model had predicted about 720. So while they were off, they were a lot closer. And enrollment in Fairfield has defied prediction for many years, right? And so I'm not going to be the one to go out too far on a limb. But birth rates are a terrible predictor of enrollment here. People move into Fairfield after they have kids, after they get to school age, and they, frankly, I think they move in here for the schools. Many of us have done that. What this is going to look like 5 years out when this big 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade start to graduate is anybody's guess, because the housing can start turning over faster than it has, and some of these homes that were owned by people that don't have kids that can finally get rid of them, families can move into them. You know, the 800 number in kindergarten is stabilizing. That's one of the higher numbers now. So, you know, I'm not sure that we're going to see a very big decline at the elementary level. That doesn't look like it. So I don't think it's big enough to have an impact. We'll adjust our staffing accordingly. You know, we adjust our staff for classroom teachers. We'll adjust our staff for, you know, art, music, and PE teachers. So, you know, we don't just roll the staff forward. We will make those adjustments. I don't think it's going to.
I started by saying, obviously, you make the adjustments on the staffing on a year-to-year basis. I was more interested in, and again, what you're saying, what you're almost saying is that the paying for these projections is worthless because nobody seems to.
No, I don't think it's worthless. I think actually they did a good job. I think they did a better job. But the issue around our facilities is not enrollment. The MGT report, which listed out all the deficiencies of our elementary schools in gory detail, were not necessarily because of enrollment. These were, you know, core facility needs and a whole bunch of items that were listed out there. So I don't, Pam wants to speak on this, but I don't see an impact there, Ken, really don't.
I think the issue is that the enrollment's not going to drop off enough to impact the needs of the buildings that we have. We're still short seats, and we're not seeing in those projections that it's going to drop off far enough that we don't need to do some of the capital projects that we need to do with the buildings. And to Dr. Title's point, we do have serious core deficiencies throughout the buildings, just because it's a lot different now, obviously, to deliver an educational program in the year 2012 than it was back in 1969. So.
Do we get copies of those? If you're doing annual updates of the firm that does the projections, does the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen get copies of those so that we can see what you guys are getting each year?
We can certainly provide them.
Yeah. Well, this year, all they did was give us one spreadsheet. We took the numbers and put them in here. So the only thing that's different is our projected enrollment in here by school is exactly what they predicted. They did not touch the out years at all.
Okay.
So there's really, you know, and we did adjust we do have their projected enrollment in here starting on page 111. You can see what their projections are here, but the updated numbers that we got from them are the ones that you see in the grid on page 112.
Right.
Can the elementary grid, for example, actually that grid right there, it's all of them. Page 112, those are the numbers we got from the firm. Okay, for 12-13. So that would be the sheet we would send you.
Sure he's done. Mr. Barthel, okay. We'll go to Mr. Bolito, and then we'll go to Mrs. Leclerc.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Title, on page 31, looking at line number 313, maintenance services, where you're projecting or asking for approximately $500,000 increase. Now, obviously, we're getting more aggressive in terms of our maintenance schedule, and I did read the breakdown on page 161 about what this covers, but can you just give us an idea what the key drivers are behind that increase? And with the renovations that are being done and the capital projects in the pipeline, do you see that number going down or stabilizing in the near future?
Okay. Yeah, the, on maintenance services, well, let me go to the lines. I think that's the best place to look at it. There's the description there. And Tom, if you want to come up and we can talk about some of these.
I think Tom's had enough of me.
Is that right? Oh, okay. All right, in our crazy coding system that we inherited, the student information system is in there for $285,000.
Say what?
Yes. So what page is that, Doreen? So page 69,
All right, 69.
because I know I kept Tom to a much more reasonable increase, much to his chagrin. So maintenance services, which begins on page 67
Okay, yep.
and carries over, the really 425,000 of that number is all related to technology. Correct.
Now,
Because there are
obvious
services.
question, why is it in maintenance? I mean,
It
I'm sure there's a
probably
reason.
won't be next year when we
Okay.
redo the chart of accounts.
all right, so really when you're looking at maintenance, you're talking about an increase of approximately
100.
Okay.
Go
that
up,
makes
if you
sense.
go up and, if you move up to that page, same page, 69,
Right.
roofing preventive maintenance, 40,000.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and Tom, that's to add 3 more roofs to our PM program, is that right?
No, actually, the
No is
roofing-
wrong.
The roofing PM, we just added money to try and do some more catch-up, and by looking at it over the years, we've been needing more to cover some of the repairs.
Right, and the building envelope PM is
The
the other
building
piece.
envelope is the one where we added 3 schools. We
Okay.
weren't doing building envelope PM on the brand-new schools.
Right, but now they're at an age where you kind of
Now
have to
we're
start
hearing
again.
from Turner Construction that the caulking and sealant used today isn't lasting 5-10 years.
Oh, great.
So we're going to add those in and start looking at Burr, Roger Little Middle School, and McKinley.
Right, which we didn't think we would have to do, but obviously we learned our lesson.
Yeah, you would kind of think you wouldn't, huh?
Right, and then there's code compliance for $10,000
Yeah.
as well.
All right, so
those
that
are the
maintenance
big
number
pieces.
makes more sense to me now.
Right,
Okay.
and the student information system is a big-ticket item
Yep.
that was identified in the audit, and I think it's going to pay major dividends for us. And I think, once we
Which line
fully-
item is that in again?
That's in Technology Services, page 69,
Got that.
Information Management Software.
All right.
And there's a fairly lengthy description of it in the document, but we have a hodgepodge of hybrid homegrown systems that are fairly costly to run and don't run particularly well.
Mm-hmm.
And once we implement this over time, we believe that there's going to be operating budget savings moving forward. But in the transition time, as you go to the new system, we're going to need to run the new system and then transition out of the old system for a year or two. There are many different modules to a student information system. So the student scheduling that we do right now, which leads to these crazy variations in class sizes, is because we have this system for scheduling these complex high schools that's something that you'd run on an Apple IIe in 1981.
Right.
All right? It's nuts.
Now, is that the
So-
one that was partnered up with Edline? Because I remember when we talked about Edline, and I know I talked about it with Greg Hatzis from
Yeah.
Woods, that it's kind of a package deal where they have the Edline system, but then they have the student information that goes along with it, which is just archaic.
Yes.
So is that going to have any impact on the Edline system
Yes,
as
the
well?
Edline system will be greatly enhanced by this.
Okay.
And Karen Parks, the deputy superintendent, has been running focus groups on this with parents and staff and meeting with vendors and vetting this. And the power of these systems and the opportunity for parents and the ease of parent access to this is 10 times what we have now with Edline. Edline is clunky,
To say the least.
to say the least. So there are significant benefits to the students, to the parents, and to the staff for changing this system over. And I have to admit, we and the board, we made the conscious effort to try to get this into our operating budget, Not that it didn't necessarily qualify under your guidelines for bonding, but we eliminated a lot of conversation around it.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I'm going to go over to Mrs. Leclerc for her question.
Oh, I forgot what it was back when we were talking about the enrollment, and on pages, it ends on 116, but, I guess it starts on 113. There's a comparison of the actual to the projection
Yes.
for the elementary schools, but not for the middle and the high schools. Can you get that for us so we can see where the changes are?
Sure. Yeah, the middle school projected enrollment is going to change again. One of the reasons it changes from school to school is because of the grandfathering and the rolling in of the new system. So to some extent, that is, but we certainly can provide you with the middle school and the high school current year and projected. That's not a problem. Yeah. The middle school will look funny because of the essentially more kids going to Woods. Right, as the kids roll in, so next year, the full 6th and 7th grade will be in the new model, and then the following year, Woods will be fully into the new system.
Okay,
Right.
I like to compare it
Sure.
to the budget for like the teachers and things, and if I see like a school going down and their enrollment's going down, it makes sense to me.
Right, I can assure
Yes.
you, and
Yes.
this is something that Margaret Mary does brilliantly, and she needs to train her successor to do this before she walks out the door, is she knows precisely how to budget to the 10th, sometimes to the 100th, based on the precise number of kids that are going into school at any grade level. And the principals are good at it, too. And so I can assure you that every fraction of a teacher has been assigned precisely based on these figures. And I should point out that another factor influencing the middle school staffing that won't be apparent in your year-over-year comparison is the new teacher's contract, which did change the teacher load at the middle school, that allowed the team size to go up by an average of like 1 student per class. And that helped us by not having to budget as many teachers next year. So that was a feature of the new teacher contract. In my PowerPoint, there was a line that said teacher load. That's what I'm talking about. So when you're looking at staffing last year, enrollment last year, staffing, current staffing, current enrollment, and looking next year at next year staffing, next year enrollment, you also have to factor in the fact that we saved about 3 teachers with this new contract provision. So just so, no one's getting shortchanged, but that is something, and Mr. Stone was involved in that, and he should take a bow. There you go.
Mrs. Leclerc, are you all set?
I'm not sure.
Mrs. McCarthy-Vahey, and then I'll come to Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cullen, I think we're going to give you some exercise this evening. I have another question. Back to the roofing and preventive maintenance and building envelopes, which is a big topic as of late. So we have the 3 newest schools essentially who are being added to the building envelope preventive maintenance program.
They were always in there. The preventive maintenance programs cover all the schools, but we work with the consultants and the contractors that are awarded the bids to put the most attention on the schools with the most need. We personally in our office didn't think the brand-new Burr School needed a thorough investigation and walkthrough and spending money there since it was a new school. We recently found out with the issues at McKinley that the newer caulkings being used today, they're not getting the life that the old caulkings used to, and that we have to spend more time and attention on those schools.
So essentially, it's not an addition of schools, it's an increase in the amount
Correct.
per school because it's a more aggressive preventive
Correct.
maintenance plan. Okay. All right, thank you. May I ask another
course.
related to the technology? With the student information system, as with my earlier question with English language learning, you talked about that being a deposit. This sounds like this one is also a deposit or a down payment on a multi-year plan going forward.
No, well, It's not a deposit, this is the full purchase. This is not a line item that you will see the following year. In other words, this is a one-time charge. Now, there is an annual maintenance fee that we would pay for this, and depending on the vendor and how we negotiate and so forth, that could be in the $50,000, $60,000 range. So this is a line item that this is not the down payment, we're buying the car now, and we're paying for it, and then, servicing the car will be in the budget going forward. Whereas English language learners, that was the warm-up, the full purchase may be next year, if we want to keep the analogy going.
May I follow up?
You can.
I don't need to further the analogy, just in
Okay.
terms of this item. Right now, with Edline and any other modules that you're using to accomplish the same goals, are there annual maintenance fees?
Yes.
And how will those compare to the annual maintenance fees on this new program?
We think that when you total them up, in terms of what we're paying in annual maintenance on the existing products that we're using, that once we fully implement the new system, the total of those maintenance fees will go down. But it won't all happen in 1 year, because, and I've done this in a couple districts, the rolling out of a new student information system is massive. It will take a couple of years, full school years, to make it happen. Over time, these other maintenance contracts will go away as we discontinue the use of their products. So right now, I think we are going to see down the road a reduction. So I think this is going to be an investment that will pay off in future budgets in terms of our annual maintenance costs.
Another follow-up with that. If we're purchasing a product, we certainly want to get the best use possible out of that product. And I know, just anecdotally, as a parent talking to other parents, that Edline, for example, is not used the same across the board by all staff, parents, and students.
Right.
When this new system is put in place, will there be cost in terms of training the teachers, in terms of getting the staff engaged and involved in making full use of the product that we are purchasing?
There are training costs involved in this, not just for all the users, but they're often included in this first year. That chunk of money includes a significant amount of training by the company on site of our staff. So we don't have to build in necessarily a large chunk of money in the first year for additional training, because it comes with it. But yes, absolutely, we'll need to do some training. And the rollout of this, is still being worked on by Mrs. Parks and the team. But it's not something that we can just take and say, okay, we bought it, on July 1st, and September 1, it's in. And quite frankly, the first probably 3 months is going to be just migrating data from one system to another, and just be back office stuff that no one's going to see. And then over time, the modules will go into place. So there will be some training, absolutely needed, but I don't see that right now as being an expense that's not already covered in our budget.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Sure. Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've just answered my questions about the software system and the maintenance going forward, so thank you for that explanation. Quickly, just a couple things, I'll get them all out of the way now, and then you can move on. The budget book is a great improvement over what we have seen in the past, and it's a great job, so thank you very much. Couple other things, the plumber, thank you for hiring a second plumber. I mean, we've got 16 buildings, we've got one plumber, and I quite frankly don't know how that work gets done, and as evidenced by some of the plumbing issues in some of our current schools or our schools now, certainly the need was there to invest in that area, so that's great work. The bus contract, transportation expenses, I think I heard you say about the new bus contract that would be going out to bid.
Right.
And that's great news. 5 years ago, the lay of the land was slightly, well, it was presented to us slightly differently, that there wasn't quite the competitive landscape out there. It came as part of a bid waiver before this board, which was denied. We ended up rebooting the whole process. We did end up going out to bid, and the town saved significant money on that on this current contract that we're about to go into the last year on. So certainly, we thought that there was a competitive marketplace out there, and there was, and obviously there still is. So if there's any help that this board or myself can provide on that, we would be glad to do so, or I could speak for myself. That was an interesting experience for me to be part of that. And the consultant that advised us the last time around, I'm not sure if it's the same consultant that we're using this time around.
It is.
It is, okay. All right, I'll reserve my comments.
But I have to say, and I've actually worked with, and Doreen and I both worked with this consultant in the last district to take a contract out to bid.
Okay.
And he's very well respected, but the consultants often will give you what you ask for. All right? So, in this case, if we send the message that we want certain changes in the contract, then the consultant will draw up the bids such that those are in there. And if you tell them, well, we're not interested in X, and they may try to talk you out of it, but, you know, X doesn't show up in there. So they're consulting, they don't get the final say.
Right, that's fair enough. The last question I had, it's not really a current budget year question, it's kind of a global, longer picture kind of question. My understanding is that when you look at school security, there are some inconsistencies, at least as it's been explained to me, from elementary school to elementary school. Some schools appear to have a better investment or a slightly different system of either entry, exit, cameras, technology that they use to safeguard their schools. And I don't know all the ins and outs, that's kind of the extent of my knowledge. But I'm wondering, as an issue, has your administration and the board started to look at that from either an improvement perspective or from a consistency perspective, so that, you know, if there are concerns out there that need to be addressed through a budget process or through an investment in technology on behalf of security, that the town can rest assured that we're at least taking a look at that and starting to move that process forward?
The answer is yes, and Tom can talk to it in a little more detail. There are inconsistencies. And one of the ways we've tried to address that is some of it is the physical structure.
Yeah.
And the poster child for that was Sherman. I mean, we just, you know, one of the big reasons to redo the front area of Sherman was security. That you couldn't see people walking through the front door. People could just go in and take a left or right, and nobody knew they were in the building. And so sometimes it has to be dealt with as a facility issue. We have one elementary school that has a buzz-in system, and the others do not. It's unclear to me, and Tom and I had this discussion, and we considered the possibility of, you know, do we go for a buzz-in system at all the elementary schools? Is that something we want to go forward with? And we decided to defer on that, to study that a little more, and I want to have some conversations with the police chief and some other people, because, you know, that's a manpower issue. And if it really doesn't work, you know, then do we really want to make the investment in the technology and the manpower? Someone's got to monitor it, and so on and so forth. So it's on the table. It's been a discussion point, but I didn't bring forward that issue this year because I just had to compete with everything else, and we just didn't have time to get the due diligence done on it because, you know, I mean, Tom has the costs on that, and he was kind of pushing for me to really consider it, but it got squeezed out, and I just didn't think I had the case to be made for it. Because somebody said, you know, is there any research to show that actually prevents anything? I'd like to have an answer.
Right.
And he goes, I'm not sure it does, and I really want to talk to Chief McNamara about that and see if he advocates for that system at the elementary level. Do you want to?
The only thing I'll add is there are monies in our security line item to start upgrading some of the equipment. A lot of the equipment and DVD players and cameras we have are over 10 years old at the elementary level, so we're starting to update some of that.
And the high school, right? Isn't there there's an upgrade for Ward in
Yep.
there, right? Yeah.
High schools and middle schools are in pretty good shape. Elementary, we're really working on, but we have hired a consultant to come in and look at the whole district, all the school buildings, which I shared with Dr. Title. That was a few years ago. Some of the things we did is change the routine. You know, the head custodians came in the morning and opened every single exterior door on the whole building, just to let everybody come in any way they wanted, in any direction. We've stopped that now, and we just do a front and back door. Once school's open and the kids are in, all the doors are locked down except for the front and the back. We're forcing people to come to the main office. So there's little things like that we're doing.
All right, certainly.
There is in one of our, I believe in one of our major maintenance projects for this year is the upgrade of the cameras at Ward, right?
Right, it's the
Yeah.
equipment base.
The equipment base, because it's an old system and doesn't work all that well, and so we're addressing it, but in increments.
Thank you. Good, thank you.
Seeing no other, oh, Mr. Walsh, please.
Oh. Yes.
Dr. Title, can you address the transportation increase costs? Specifically, I'd like to start off on page 71 on the summer school transportation costs. Because you seem to go from, if you go historically take that number, you have a budgeted number for 10/11 of $114,397. The actual for that year was $50,000 more. So then we start off the next year, we budget the same as the previous year, 114, and lo and behold, the number comes in $50,000, actual comes in $50,000 once again. Now we seem to be going back for the third year to make a mistake and budget 119. Why wouldn't you budget $50,000 more?
It's a grant issue, right?
The excess cost provision. That's a number we specifically under budget because we refund it with the excess cost reimbursement money. That's special ed transportation for summer school. And so that's a planned event, not a mistake.
So are you saying that we get the $50,000 back from the state of Connecticut?
Yes.
Okay. And that number pops in where?
Okay, Mr. Walsh?
I'm not sure what it.
Where does that number, where would that number come? Is that back in income?
In the revenue section, you'll see the excess cost provision, the reimbursement of excess cost.
Is there a specific line item for the excess costs on summer school transport?
No, it's a lump sum figure that we then go back and fill in a multitude of accounts across the special ed lines. So special ed transportation being one of them. But there are many, many accounts that are backfilled with the excess cost reimbursement in compliance with the excess cost provision.
So if we budget for the upcoming year for the 119,748, are we covered for every dollar for dollar above that? Through excess costs, we just bill back any of that money back to the state through excess costs?
That's how it's supposed to work.
Yes.
Okay, so they take our budgeted line, and then they reimburse us dollar for dollar versus actual, whatever the actual costs come in at.
That they don't look at our budget at all.
Okay.
They take the costs per child that exceed 4.5 times the per pupil expenditure, and they send us a lump sum figure based on the formula and the caps that the state has. Then we decide how that gets apportioned out into our budget based on their guidelines. So that's, the state doesn't say, well, you budgeted 110, so if you spend more than that, we're going to give you the difference back. We send them a list of all the kids whose expenses go above their limit, and then they run it into the formula and send it back to us.
So for budgeting purposes, how do you plan that out?
You try to budget the net, is basically what happens, because that money comes to us.
And do you budget that net based on the number of kids that are special education?
Right.
Okay. So this increase for this coming year for $5,619 is basically showing us that we have more special education and children who are going to be in the summer program?
That's probably just a contract increase, probably a 3% or 4%, you know.
Well, why didn't you do that in previous years? Because in the previous two budgeted periods of time, you only went up, actually, you went down in your budgeted amount from 114,397 to 114,129.
In previous years, special education was always under budgeted. It was never adequately funded in a whole bunch of areas. So I'm not sure how the other budgets were constructed. I've only constructed the current one and the next one. But I know, for example, on the tuition front,
You were here for the last budget, correct?
The current one, the one we're currently in.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's here, right? That was the 114,129?
Correct. Right.
And it actually went down from the previous budgeted year.
Right.
All right, it just concerns me that, I don't know, it almost makes sense if we could try to, on the excess cost, maybe have a spreadsheet on how that breakdown is made up of, what it's made up of, like transportation or,
It's in here.
it is?
Yes, give us a second. All the revenue from all the grants is broken down by the lines they're assigned to. Page 8.
Page 8.
Right. Yeah, page 8, 5105.
So in that number of $162,895, it seems like it's been a flat amount. I'm led to believe that
Right.
some of that is for the summer school transportation?
Right, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, that special ed excess cost is dependent on the state's budget, which is not finished. So we're carrying the same number forward on that. But that's an estimate based on the state's budget and the caps they put on these grants.
And the remaining part in the whole transportation area, the whole $563,430 increase, is, most of that is the contracted costs increases.
Yeah, about 3% of the total, about 220,000 of that is the contract. And some of it is having to add additional buses for next year, 2 additional buses. And some of it is that we're over budget this year in the transportation accounts, and we have to carry that forward as our base.
So we're going to be adding 2 additional buses?
Yes.
Is that for the increased number of students?
For an increased number of students and some of the other changes about where the kids have distributed themselves versus where we thought they were going to live.
Okay. When do the transportation numbers start going down because of the grandfathering system at the middle schools?
After this next year.
After this
One more
current year? So what?
No, we've got this year.
Yeah.
Is the first year grandfathering. Next year is the second and final year of grandfathering.
When we say next year, we're talking about the
12,
budget year we're
13.
talking about now?
Exactly right.
So after this,
Right.
So in the next budget we see, I should be expecting to see a dramatic decrease in transportation numbers?
For the, yeah, you'll see a 6 to 7 bus, yeah, for the 13-14 budget. 2 things are going to happen. One is grandfathering will be gone, so all those costs will be gone. And the second thing is we'll be in a new bus contract with a new, well, might be the same contractor, but a new 5-year contract, which we're hoping will give us more cost-effective, but we just don't know. So that will be, there'll be 2 changes in 13-14, new bus contract and no grandfathering.
Okay. In regards to electricity costs, it seems like the town negotiated a pretty good rate, reducing your total budgeted costs in electricity by $713,124. That went into effect January 1st for the entire town?
Mr. Hiller, can you help with that? When did that hit?
It started January 1st of this year.
If I transpose that out, I guess I'm expecting in this current budget year, with the money you have now, there should be a $350,000 savings?
It's going to be in that range.
Is that money you think you're going to be able to turn back over to the town?
Too early to tell. We've had some unanticipated expenditures on the emergency maintenance realm that are eating that up. For example, the Ward boiler went kaput, and we have to replace it. It's about $150,000. And there have been a couple others like that. So this has allowed us to take care of some maintenance emergencies.
Was that boiler supposed to be replaced in the upcoming, I know not this
Now,
budget?
it was a 1971 boiler. It wasn't on the list.
It wasn't on the list, wasn't on the radar?
No, not in the, not in the next couple of years, no. There were a couple others. I mean, if you want, Tom can explain the other problems, but the Ward boiler replacement was a big one, so it will help us.
Okay. In conference and travel, you seem to be going up 4.6%, primarily being in the Fairfield Ludlow and Fairfield Ward conferences. What are those for, and why are there such dramatic increases in those budgets?
Well, they're part of the school's allocation. The principal headmaster get an allocation. And in that allocation, it's a per pupil allocation. Within that allocation, they assign certain pots of money to textbooks, supplies, conferences, and so forth. So basically, in the headmaster's judgment, they felt they needed to have their teachers go to more conferences in the upcoming year than they did in this year, and it just meant they had to take it out of something else that was in their allocation. I will say that, without speaking for Mr. Coyne or Dr. Rial, that there is so much change going on right now with high school curriculum reform, with initiatives at the state level on secondary school reform, that keeping up with all the changes that our staff need, I can see why they would want to make that decision. Just one example is we're required now to have, starting this next year, what are called student success plans for every single student, an individual plan. This is something that was in the legislation. It's a mandate. That's a kind of thing where, you need to send people to quite a bit of training on it. The state will run workshops on it. We need to get up to speed on it. So I can see why they would make that decision, but it's one of those things that was part of their allocation, so they prioritized it.
Okay. Getting rid of winter recess, that the Board of Education made its determination that they were going to kill it for next year. Well, remove it from the schedule. Is there any plus or minus on that? Is there any, savings or additional costs on a global basis that are in this budget?
I don't think so.
From heating costs to whatever?
There's nothing material there.
There's no cost effect whatsoever?
No.
Okay. In regards to the cuts that were made last year, that were made at all levels, from the Board of Selectmen on down, what was the most painful cut? Like, what did you find to be the most painful for the program?
I think the most painful cut for me personally, again, none of them were pleasant. I want to tell you, I didn't really want to suggest any of them to the board. I think probably the most difficult one to put on the table was the reduction in the world language program in grades 4, 5, and 6. Because that was but there were others, there were a lot of them in the aggregate that weren't particularly pleasant. But that was one, and I think we were pretty clear when the RTM was considering the last 800,000, and the question, was what would get, remember with the referendum push?
Yes.
People had asked us, what would get restored if the 800,000 were restored? And again, it's not my decision, my recommendation would have been to reinstate the world language. So to me, that was the last one that we put on the table, would have been the first one to come back. And that being said, I think we need to see and adjust to that and see how that goes, for a year or so, and evaluate what the effects of that have been. And in a future budget, if we decide we want to maybe think about a reinstatement there, we'll put that on the table. It's just too early to do it this year, and the resources are too scarce. Okay. But that would be my answer. I'm sure every board member has one or more. Everyone has their own favorite. We heard earlier about, the libraries at the high school, and every one of those in their own way just took a little nick out of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
In regards to, I missed your general presentation, I apologize, but how many retirements are you estimating that are in this budget?
I'm glad you asked that question. It was not in the presentation. So, we budgeted for 12 teacher retirements, which 2 more than we typically budget for. But this year, presently, as of the moment, we have 7 in hand. So we're in pretty good shape with respect to that. But there's 12, full teacher retirements built into this.
Okay. There's been a number of principals who've come out already who've retired
Right.
or retiring the end of the coming school year. What kind of savings will the district recognize by those principal retirements?
Well, it all depends on who you hire in their place. There's not a big savings in there as there is in the teacher. The principal's contract has many, many fewer steps. So the difference between even hiring a step one principal and a top step principal, I think there are 6 steps, Margaret Mary? 6 steps. And so the difference there is much, much less. You know, when a teacher retires on max and we budget for a master's level 1 replacement, we budget for a savings of approximately $35,000 per teacher.
Sure.
With a principal, if you bring an experienced principal in, and I wouldn't rule that out because I think sometimes you do need to bring an experienced person in, you may have no savings. If you bring in somebody who has had no experience as a principal, the savings might be, what's the difference between 1 and 6, would you say, 15,000? Something like that.
How much is?
15,000.
15? And how many current principals have notified you that they're retiring?
3.
All right. I was saddened to learn of Margaret Mary's retirement, although I'm happy for you, and thank you for your service to the town. Is there going to be savings in this replacement?
Yes.
Okay. And if so, we'd love to have you.
The ink is not yet dry on the retirement letter.
I'm just trying to cover all my bases. Is there going to be
Right.
is there any estimated amount of savings in that?
I would
that are in
say,
the budget?
yeah, maybe 10,000.
Okay. Is there any other central administration staff that have given any type of notice of retirements or any other savings in that we'll recognize in retirements that you know of right now?
No, that's it. You know, we also assume some turnover of staff that may or may not materialize beyond retirements in the budget to the tune of about $350,000. So, you know, not only do we need the retirements to happen, but we need other staff turnover to happen. So, you know, where you may pick it up, you know, 10,000 here for an administrator, perhaps, you know, you have to cover yourself that you may not get it in the other places you have estimated it. I think every year what happens is, you know, estimate certain savings in certain areas and they materialize or they don't, and you save in one place, you don't save in the other, and you keep your fingers crossed that it balances out. So I don't think that, and I'm particularly on the principal front, I don't want to be committed to having to hire somebody on the first step or second step to save money. Sort of different from, you know, in some cases for teachers, we really do insist on that, but I really want to have the option there to bring an experienced person into the system if they're really the best possible candidate. I think that's a really good investment of that extra $10,000 or $15,000.
So is that your philosophy in general, that you don't want to bring basically a rookie principal into our district?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. I just want the option. You know, and if the budget in their area sort of got reduced, then I would really feel pressured to bring somebody in, say, on the first step when somebody with 3 or 4 years or 5 years, you know, really wanted to come here. I think, you know, now that we're up to 3 elementary principals leaving, I really want to be able to look at the whole elementary principal staff that we have and complement that as a whole group of 11, as opposed to looking at each individual. And it could be that bringing 3 people in who don't have experience will work fine, and the skill set they bring will complement the skills that we have. But this is a whole team. And I need to make sure that, you know, like a basketball team, I don't want to have 11 point guards. So I just want to keep the option open. So that's why I'd be reluctant to sort of, you know, officially announce that I can definitely save X dollars in elementary principals, because I don't want to be penned into to that. It may turn out, you know, just can't be sure.
In regards to, on page 76, the tuition, specifically the pupil personnel services, the tuition to other schools,
Yes.
can you tell me how you got to the 127,566 increase?
Yeah, there's a page on that, Jim. This is the account, by the way, if you remember, all from last year, that had been always underfunded, and we
Yes.
took our medicine on it.
Yes.
So that as a percentage is actually just just in a big picture way, the tuition to all these schools tends to go up by 3 or 4% a year for the existing placements. So that alone will almost eat that all up. But
Okay.
there is a page back here, page 140, where I make Andrea prove it out. So people don't think we just Oh, that's 140A, it's 140. Not 140A, 140. So that's how we get to it.
How are we seeing those placements going? Increasing, decreasing, staying the same?
They're fairly stable. We always have unexpected ones, and that was where we got ourselves in trouble by not anticipating any additional placements, because all it does is take one kid with a big placement, and all of a sudden that account can really jump on you. Sometimes students place out, and they age out. So in other words, they get to age 21, they complete the year, they graduate from our requirement, and so they disappear off the budget picture. And then that will, of course, somebody else might move in, and that, you know, that takes their place. Other times, and Andrea works very hard on this, to work with parents, staff, and the outplacement providers to where we can possibly educate the student in district to try to bring them back, even if it means bringing them back with some support. It's less expensive sometimes to bring somebody back and pay for a full-time paraprofessional than it is to have them outplaced. So we try to bring some back, and there's sort of a forecast about that. So, but it's a very volatile account. It can be a very volatile account, and school districts have seen their whole budgets just get killed by a couple kids moving in.
Well, I know I was one that you finally budgeted, or not you, because it was your first budget, so that you came out of with your budget and properly funded that account for the first time in many years. I thought properly funded it, and I think that's great. The only question I have is, your estimated amount, obviously we're still halfway through the year, or just slightly past halfway through the year. How is that account looking? Because right now I see your estimated expenditure to be the exact same amount of dollars that you budgeted.
Right.
So is someone, not necessarily yourself, but is someone present who can tell us, like,
Andrea.
year to date,
Yeah.
how we're looking and whether
Andrea,
we're looking
the
above,
mic.
below?
Same question I asked her when we developed the budget.
I can say that for the first time in about 10 years, that special education, the tuition line is in the black right now. So
Right.
we're anticipating we will be perfectly funded for the year.
Great.
That we had some students come back, some students go out, there's been movement, but from a funding perspective, we're doing great.
Right. Okay, she didn't use the microphones. The answer was, for the first time in special ed history, that account is in the black. That's the short version.
No, I think that's great.
And
it
so,
just
as a
shows-
result, by essentially taking our medicine in the current year budget, this budget really has a modest, basically inflation increase in it, as opposed to a big number. And this is at a 75% excess cost projection, cap, because the state has an excess cost line item, and they don't overexpend it. And so we think they're only going to fund 75% of what we're actually owed. A point I make to the legislators repeatedly, and if you ever want to know or tell them what is the one thing they could do that would directly impact our budget more than anything else, it would be to stop capping the excess cost, because this money comes directly back to us, directly goes into this book, and goes directly onto this line. And it's a simple fix, no ECS machinations, no big fancy formulas. It's just, put it in there, and that would help us out tremendously.
Great. Well, you are to be commended, since we are in the black, that you properly budgeted for this, which I know this Board of Finance has been trying to get them to do for a while, and I think we finally got there. So I think that's worked out great then for this year. My last question has to come in regards to the cuts in the paras, the 23.7. And it doesn't affect your budget, but it affects the town side budget. And I guess I'm not sure whether the fiscal officer can assist with the answer to this question, because with the loss of 23.7 paras, presumably most of these people are going to be collecting unemployment. That unemployment compensation falls upon the town of Fairfield, not the school district, correct?
Well, can we jump in on that? Because I think the assumption that they're going to end up on unemployment is probably not a good assumption.
Yeah, I think, just to clarify, there's been extensive conversations between Paul Hiller with central office staff, so we should both have an answer and be in agreement on it. So,
This is a bargaining unit, and Margaret Mary can speak to this. This is a bargaining unit that has tremendous turnover in it. There's approximately 200 paraprofessionals in the school district, and we had some reductions in the current year, and none of those paraprofessional positions that were eliminated this year did any of those people end up on the unemployment. That's not why the unemployment went up. We would anticipate that there would be a similar turnover, and that we do not anticipate that this will fluff up your unemployment number. But again, if you feel nervous about it and want to put something in there, obviously that's up to you, but we feel comfortable that we can absorb these with the turnover.
and Mr. Hiller, can you just confirm that you've had a chance to look at that and you're okay with that?
The primary recipients of unemployment right now are from, and Dr. Title touched on it before, is the language teachers who were laid off.
Wrong. No, it's the infotech people,
The infotech people
Yeah.
and the, what's
early
some
literacy tutors.
the tutors, yeah,
Yep.
that group.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, it's,
We're-
yeah.
I don't have the total information. I can share it back with both boards.
So is the representation, Dr. Title, that not one paraprofessional received $1 of unemployment compensation from the town of Fairfield
Because of a layoff.
because of a layoff?
Correct. As a matter of fact.
You're
didn't-
positive about that?
No, I'm looking at the list.
Okay.
I should also tell you that no teacher did either, because we were able to slot actually all of the world language position eliminations. Those people held other certifications, or there were retirements or leaves of absence. We were able to place them. So there are no teachers, despite the large number of positions that were eliminated. I mean, we eliminated 30 positions year over year in our budget. But we did. There were a couple of secretaries that we could not place and that are on the unemployment rolls. There are early literacy tutors and the media techs at the elementary level. Those are the folks on our side that, because of RIFs, ended up on the unemployment rolls. So-
One of the secretaries has been hired back in January, I believe.
Right, right.
As a full-time secretary?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Is there anybody who's currently in the district who's receiving both unemployment compensation and a paycheck from the town of Fairfield?
I don't know. I'd have to check on that.
Can you get back to us on that?
When you say from the town of Fairfield, realize that there are, you have two separate employers.
Okay,
the
from the
town
Board of
Fairfield and
Education.
the Board of Education.
From the Board of
So I'd have
Education.
to- I'd have to verify that.
Okay. And how much is the town paying in unemployment compensation for the school district to date?
We've estimated that through the end of the year, based on the current trends, that we will pay close to $300,000 on behalf of the Board of Education.
And what is that expected to be for next year with the current, current plan that Dr. Title has in place?
We've carried an estimate in the town budget of $400,000 for unemployment compensation for next year, which is the figure that we feel that we will hit this year. Now, that includes both the town and the Board of Education. As indicated before, roughly three-quarters of that $400,000 would be attributable to the Board of Education. One of the things we've started to see, but just on the payment that was made in February, which is in essence for benefits that were paid in December, we've started to see a decline. As indicated, one individual has been rehired. Some other people are finding some employment someplace. The payment on behalf of the Board of Education, for example, in January was roughly in excess of $25,000. The payment for February for benefits paid in January was just under $20,000. And we'd have to see, which we will know, we'll get the next bill next week to see how that's beginning to track. But we have, virtually no experience in this.
So in the town's budget that we're dealing with right now on the town side, we have 400,000, you think three-quarters of it is attributable to Board of Education personnel.
That's correct. Now, we may be able to modify that based on experience as we go along and before this budget's finalized, before these two boards and the RTM.
All right, can you get back to me regarding whether there's any paras getting unemployment, or if any has been paid unemployment during the course of the current budget year?
I shall
Thank you.
report that back to both boards on
Thank you,
Tuesday.
Mr. Flynn. I'm done for right now.
We have an answer to an earlier question,
Please.
which had to do with the secretaries. Marty Mary has done her research, and when the 2011-2012 budget was developed, we did not have a settled contract for that bargaining unit, and therefore we carried in the budget a flat figure. So this budget, 12-13, carries 2 years' worth of increases.
So
there's
it's
your
2% each year.
Right, there you go.
Thank you.
So you've, that, it's approximately $60,000 plus an extra $68,000, which is what your difference is.
Thank you. Thank you for following up. I'll go to Mr. Stone and then Mrs. McCarthy.
I just want to follow up on something that Mr. Walsh said. That boiler at Fairfield Woods, I know it was an, Ward. rather.
Ward.
I know it was an emergency, but why didn't we know about it?
Just don't know when they're going to fail. It's
No,
30
but
30
why
years
weren't
old.
we, as a Board of Finance, who spends hours discussing other things, I had no inkling about this until today.
We pay for it out of our budget. Shows up in our expenses. Now, it's relatively, it's actually going in now. So the bill is probably getting paid shortly, so it'll show up on a quarterly statement, you know, when it posts, and you'll see some overages in that arena, in the major maintenance projects. But see, even there, not every major maintenance project is done, and so, in other words, that's where it won't show up. But there have been several, you know, emergencies that we've had to deal with that we have no choice but to deal with them.
No, I realize you had no
Yeah.
choice. I just thought, you know, because we're always spend hours sometimes discussing a boiler that
Right.
doesn't get passed.
Right.
You know, and I know this was an emergency, but I just was sort of surprised that I never heard about it till just Mr. Walsh asked the question.
Yeah. It's our problem. Yeah. Right. If, right. Right. We weren't coming forward for a supplemental appropriation to handle it. So if you'd like us to do that, the problem is by the time that happened, it would be next winter. Right.
Is it on that?
I understand.
Mrs. McCarthy, I'm going to let Mr. Brockfield, because it's follow.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what Mr. Stone's bringing up, because I think there is a bigger issue here, though.
Yeah.
And it's not that the boiler didn't necessarily need to be done, or that necessarily you had to have a conference call with the Board of Finance to approve of it. But I think that what Mr. Walsh brought up, which I think, by the way, is an extremely excellent observation that you found in the budget, was that there's $350,000 of savings on electricity that was gotten because of either luck or skill or both by the town. And mostly skill, I hear, Mr. Walsh.
Right.
And yeah, Mr. Tetro actually controls the natural gas markets.
Actually,
Right.
guys, this one goes all for Twig.
Yeah,
Twig,
that's
Holland,
right.
and Purchasing, guys.
But,
Right.
but I think you know I'm going with this. So the point is that $350,000 is a savings that didn't happen because you guys did things more efficiently or better. It just fell into your lap, so to speak. And you guys decided unilaterally, and it probably is within your legal rights, obviously, to spend that money
On a boiler.
on a boiler, which maybe was predictable and maybe should be, I'm not saying it is, but, and maybe should be provisioned for in some contingency line in your budget. So in other words, the worst, I'm not really focusing on this boiler, to be perfectly honest, but I think that there's two separate issues going on here. There's the need to replace a boiler and a $350,000 windfall that happened, and the two of them are completely unrelated, and what you guys did really is put the two together. And
Well, we don't have a contingency, right? We don't have a rainy day fund. We have no contingency line anywhere. So when unexpected things happen, we have to look for other places in the budget to save the money. I mean, if I brought forward a budget that said, major maintenance projects, contingency, $300,000, that would be fine. If you're agreeable to that, we'll put it in there. Then we don't have to have this problem. But the fact is that we have no contingency. So everything's accounted for in there.
Yeah,
I got it.
What would you have done if you didn't have this $350,000 windfall and the boiler had blown up and you needed to spend $150,000 on a boiler?
Well, we'd have to either take it out of some other line somewhere in the budget, freeze spending, which has happened sometimes in the district. You get to a certain point of the year, you tell people, well, you know, you thought you could buy X, Y, and Z for equipment this year. You haven't spent it by now, you don't get to spend it. And so things that people were properly budgeting for, they won't get spent. In the worst-case scenario, you actually, I mean, you hate to ever have to do this. In a worst-case scenario, sometimes you do have to come back for a supplemental appropriation if you really don't have it. It's really a terrible thing to have to do, and we would do everything in our power to avoid doing it. But, you know, some things do happen. But we return money at the end of the year if we don't, you know, I think we gave back some money at the end of last year even. But
I would kind of, you know.
It's just, I mean, you know, there's some things where you budget and they come in under budget, and that becomes a little bit of a
I don't think
windfall.
anybody up here, certainly not me, is arguing that you either expected the boiler to happen or you wished it to happen.
Right,
But
right.
I would say as a
He was in there hitting it with a
yeah,
rock.
right, yeah. But I would say, but I would actually say as a matter of practice that for numbers of this magnitude, and this goes into the category of the Supreme Court justice who said, you know when you see it. I don't know what the number is. It's something more than $50 and something less than $500,000. But that there should have been some notification to the boards that this is what you were doing. Look, we saved $350,000. We have a $150,000 problem. This is a fortuitous thing, and we're going to use some of that money to offset this. Because I think it violates some spirit of something. I can't put it in words exactly, but the 350, again, if you guys had realized savings of $350,000 through things that you had done in a more efficient fashion, then I think there's no question that money could be used for whatever purpose you see necessary. But I think this is different because this is a savings. It's almost as if the pension savings that we are going to happen mid-year rather than now.
Right. No, I understand.
And then you guys said, oh, well, you know, we saved whatever it is, a couple $100,000 on the necessary contributions, so we're going to go and fix a boiler that burst. I don't think that would be right. Do you know what I'm trying to get, Mr. Walsh? I know it's your
No, I
original.
understand. If you don't mind if I jump in, Mr.
I know Mr. Tetra wants to respond as well.
Mike, you had your hand up
If
first. Why don't you go
it's
ahead?
directly on those lines, I don't want to destroy the train of conversation I had a follow-up on.
I just right along with Mr. Brockfeld said, I guess I agree with him because it creates a possible area of abuse, and I'm not saying, Dr. Title, you're not abusing that. I mean, we had an unfortunate situation of losing a boiler, and thank God we had this pool of money available.
Right.
But it could set up areas for abuse, such as the bathrooms that were the capital project for the bathrooms. If you had a $350,000 windfall and decided to do the rest of the bathrooms, and then all of a sudden people found out, like, how'd the rest of the bathrooms get done? Well, we had this pool of money we just found and whatever. I don't think people would be very happy. So in some respects, like major expenses like that and major savings, at least through the Board of Finance, if they know about it, creates a lot of trust going back and forth. This way people know of major expenditures that they didn't know about in the budget, and also major income savings or expense savings that they did not know about. And $350,000 and $150,000 seem big enough that probably should be at least discussed or mentioned as some type of footnote.
We should point out that in the last quarterly report to the Board of Finance, this was mentioned. The boiler was not specifically mentioned, but Doreen points out that we did identify that we had overages in our maintenance projects line, and that this was out there. We didn't enumerate them. Right, that we were covering it with savings elsewhere. It was a generic statement. It wasn't specifically about, we've saved this much in this line, and we're going over here. So it wasn't completely everything, but it was signaled in the report.
Yeah, just, if I might, just a couple things here. One is the timing. The $350,000 started on January 1st, so it hasn't been saved yet. All right, it's projected to be saved based on what the energy costs are. So that's one piece. Second is that the boiler is going in this week, so that's relatively late-breaking news. I think one of the things that Dr. Title has done is come back to the board and institute a practice of reporting or giving the Board of Finance an update on a quarterly basis at the quarterly reviews, where I would as was mentioned, part of this was reported. I expect the rest of it be reported in April. So some of those things don't get in the cut because of just the timing. So some of this is late-breaking news. I think the other piece here is that this was a 30-year-old boiler,
Yes.
roughly 40-year-old
40.
boiler. Relatively young by boilers that have been turned down. The last one turned down last year was a 50-year-old boiler, so the school district does have a boiler replacement plan in place. They are trying to do that. The Dwight boilers were 49-year-old last year, I guess 50, I don't know when their birthday is, but sometime soon. That
Yeah,
was
we're gonna
supposed to
have a
get put in the
cake.
budget to get that replaced. That was put off last year. So on one hand, they are trying to put together a maintenance program to address some of the more probable failures. We got a
You guessed wrong.
you know, you're rolling the dice at some point, but I think that shows to some degree what rolling the dice does. And every year a boiler gets older, I think that certainly puts the Dwight boiler replacement in a different light this year.
The other thing I would point out that, when we just sent this out to the board, and I think it would be helpful for us to send it to you if it didn't go to you. I've asked Tom to put together on a regular basis the status of all the major maintenance projects that are in the budget, how much was budgeted for each, how much was expended, what the current balance is there. And at the bottom of that page, it shows the unexpected expenses that we had to incur, and they're listed by estimated amount and so forth. And we can send that to you.
That'd be
And it includes the major maintenance projects that are in the operating budget as well as the capital projects that were approved. So that may just really give you all the information that, you know, you need on it, pending further issues that may crop up in the next 5 months.
And by the way, there's been a tremendous improvement in the communications through that quarterly report that's done. So in fairness, that's been, you know, very good, and that has helped at least myself tremendously understand what's going on in the school district. So,
Yeah.
I do want to move on.
Yeah, I just
So
want
go
one
ahead.
follow- I just want to make clear that,
Yeah.
because there was no intention to apply any nefariousness of any sort.
Right.
Whatsoever. There's no question a boiler needs to be replaced.
Right.
I just felt that they were two
Right.
separate items, and it was very convenient to package them together. That's all.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mrs. McCarthy-Vahey, who's been waiting patiently.
Thank you. Back to the out-of-district student tuition, which it appears is one of those things that keeps going up tuition. It seems, wish we could invest in that.
By a
Parents
tuition
can
future.
invest in prepaid tuition.
Right.
Those are good investments. But specialized programs, I remember back at the January meeting when Mrs. Leonardi was talking about the elementary special ed, the change in model. And then I noticed in the out-of-district student tuition, in the description here, the student support centers. And I'm wondering, you talked about it briefly a few minutes ago, in terms of how that works to help control costs in this area, and what those are, where they are,
Sure.
how they're staffed.
I'll give you the big overview, and if you want more details, Andrea will be happy to jump in. The student support centers, first of all, are not part of the new model for elementary special education staffing. They have their own staffing needs based on the students and the needs that are in there. So they're separate from the revision to the model in terms of increasing certified teachers and decreasing paras. They're their own program, and they serve mostly autistic children who were not for our having these programs in-house. These children would very likely be outplaced to much more expensive and much more cost to the district. So they are advantageous to the point of educating students in the home district, which is preferable to an outplacement. They have the opportunity for mainstreaming with typical peers throughout the day as appropriate. And it's less costly to the district. So we think we get a better education at less cost where we can do it. But we don't have enough students to have one of these programs, to justify one of these programs in every school. So we have them at Dwight, we have one at Jennings, I'm going to forget where the other one is, on Osborne Hill. And so students are placed in those programs accordingly, and that's how that works.
thank you. May I continue? The other question was actually related to textbooks and the instructional supplies materials line. If I'm correct, that's line 401, page 29, that 166,000, that is that the textbook increase that you were talking about
Yes,
earlier?
correct.
So my question is actually looking into the future, and we've talked about, well, prior to sitting on this side of the table and being out in the audience, talking about having enough textbooks for students. But one of my questions is, textbooks seem to me that over time will become a thing of the past as we have things like Kindles and e-readers, and I'm wondering, I think Nancy has actually left and isn't here, but perhaps you can help.
She's right there.
Oh, there she is?
Yeah.
Oh, yay, there she is, thank you. My apologies, Nancy. But what the long-term plan is and thought about that, has the district had conversation about what that means in the future, near future, long-term future, in terms of what we're paying for textbooks? That's part one. And part two is, do we have sufficient textbooks currently for our students?
The answer to the second question is easy. The answer is yes. The answer to the first question is more complicated. The conversations are going on. One of the things that Mrs. Parks is doing in her role is working with Nancy Nash and teachers and others to come up with a revised technology plan for the district, 3-year technology plan for the district. And this is a huge issue. It's one of the reasons why one of our priorities in technology upgrade for next year is wireless in all the schools, because we think that is the future. And we think there are going to be more resources available to kids and teachers on tablets and so forth. But it's fraught with peril. In the meantime, though, the textbook, I don't see going away in the near future. I don't think that's happening. I think that the line is, program materials and so forth. Textbooks are one feature of that. But these are the resources needed to implement the new programs. So we have a new music curriculum going into place next year, K-5. A lot of the materials used to teach music at the elementary level are not textbooks, but they'd be in this line. We are looking at technology as part of implementing all these programs. So it's resources broadly defined here. I think for language arts, English, I think the printed text is going to be with us for quite a while. I don't know if Nancy or Karen wants to speak to this in any more depth, but every school district is wrestling with this very issue.
We actually have a couple of initiatives that we're currently putting into place to start experimenting with more online materials and providing children with other alternatives, some of the devices that you already mentioned. But as Dr. Title said, we have to tread somewhat carefully. I don't see the hardback textbook disappearing all at once. It's going to be a slow transition. There isn't a standard format, for example, for things that are in an electronic format, be they textbooks or other kinds of books. Anybody that's bought a Nook and then tried to use it on a Kindle understands that. There are lots of materials that are in PDF format, but not really in an e-publishing format, which means you can't do the flipping of the pages as nicely. And then the wireless situation is another one. We're all about 24/7 learning and 21st century skills, but we're still working within the walls of the schools. We need to be able to make sure we've got the infrastructure when they're within the walls to be able to use any kind of wireless device to get to those resources that we want to provide to them. We're also looking and have subscribed to some services that will allow us to build e-collections, if you will, so library books that will be in electronic format. So we have a lot of things going on, a lot of good conversations happening, but it's evolving. And I know it's really exciting because I love this stuff. But I'd just say stay tuned.
Thank you, and I'm glad you were here. I was hoping to hear from you because I know you have a lot of great work going on. I think the reason that I asked the question is just to be sure that as we're looking at those future plans, we're not spending on resources that we find that we're moving into the next generation more quickly, and that we'll be using those resources for a long enough period that it makes it worthwhile investing in them.
I actually believe that in the music area, Gary, am I right, that some of the enhancements in the music area are technology-based? Is that right? Right. So, yeah, it's definitely there. I mean, we're all over it. I think that we're trying to get a handle on, software and most effective use of software and being consistent with that across the district so we can be assured that no matter where you go to school, you have access to the same high-quality software. That's been a bit school-based, for lack of a better word. So we've got some consistency we're still working on in a lot of the areas with technology.
I have one other unrelated question, may I?
I think we have a related question. Do we?
What was textbooks that I went?
Okay. Do you want to? Okay, go ahead.
I'm moving on to a different area, so I'm happy to stick with textbooks for a minute if you want.
Okay. We touched briefly on supplies and textbooks and things, and you said that we do have enough. And I know from my own personal experience, my daughter didn't have a science textbook for the first 2 weeks of school. So I don't believe that's the case at the high schools, and I don't really see any significant increase, even though you said for the next 3 years, that's where your increase in
Right.
student population is going to be.
Right. Well, if there's not a book, it's not because there's not a budget to support it. There may be other reasons why a student doesn't have a book. And I don't, the specific cases are hard, but there's always money to make sure every kid has a book. And if we do carry some additional funding, Jan Burns' department carries money for unanticipated enrollment increases for equipment, supplies, and so forth. If somebody really gets stuck, they can, go there. So our goal is to make sure that, there's no reason why every kid shouldn't, have a book. So it would not be a budget-related problem, let me put it that way. And I'll leave it at that. I'm sure there's instances of situations where somebody didn't get one, but it's not because there's not sufficient funds.
Okay, but
Yeah.
like if you look at the detail on
Right.
page 82, like for Fairfield Ward or
Yep.
really the budget's gone down and then it's kind of gone back up, but really not significantly. And
Right.
I'm sure the cost of textbooks has gone up significantly.
Well, we count on the headmasters and the principals to sort of take inventory. They work with the curriculum leaders because, the books don't all have to be replaced every year, obviously. And then if they need additional books in their areas to replace what they have, that's what is reflected in there. If the inventory is sufficient and the condition of the books is good enough, then they leave it alone. If there's going to be a large change in a curricular area, then that gets budgeted in the program areas. And that's where you're seeing the big increases in this budget. So in the first year, basically, the way we do textbook budgeting is this, or resource budgeting. In the year that we do a program change, and there's going to be a large chunk of money going into a certain area, that gets budgeted centrally for the first year. After year one, schools have to budget to maintain that inventory for the duration of the program. So this year, there's a couple $100,000 increase in textbook/resources for new programs that are going in place. Anything at the building level, they're simply budgeting for replacement textbooks or any anticipated increase in enrollment. And the other thing we do is we move books around the district if we have to.
So where are the other ones for like a new program budget?
They are in the program budgets, which is
Right, the next, right below, Dr. Title.
83, 82.
83.
83. 83, 401, instructional supplies, materials, subheading 60. You can see that increase in the aggregate across all of those areas is $193,000.
Right, okay. It's better.
I am very glad to hear this concern about textbooks and supplies and instruction. This is refreshing. We're excited.
Don't get carried away.
I know.
May I-
Not me.
Mr. Walsh.
Are you going to come back to me?
Dr. Title, I did not see anything in regards to the capital budget proposal for technology regarding smart boards. Is there any smart boards in the entire budget?
No.
Is there any, we talked last year about this, and you said you were going to be looking into it, but you weren't getting any last year either.
Right.
And there was talk about doing some type of smart board policy or whatever, strategy or whatever it was going to be. Did that get off the ground in the last year?
I think Nancy or Karen, do you want to speak about this? Because this was, is this Karen Parks?
Yes, we asked the principals, the building principals and the teachers to get together and prioritize because there are smart boards in some classrooms that aren't being used effectively. The priorities were across the district that the teachers would prefer to have the projection system, which is an LCD projector that's hooked into a computer, and there's a lot of things they can do on that without necessarily having the smart board. So for now, their priorities were first, to get wireless, second, to get projection systems where they didn't have them, and then if we do decide to continue to implement smart boards, that would be the next priority. But there isn't enough money to do it all, so they were very much, it was their priority to do the wireless and the projection systems first. A lot of the teachers are using projection systems without a smart board, and they're using it very effectively. So, and there's a lot of computer programs now that allow you to do very similar things, or iPads. Some of the classrooms use iPads, so each student has the mobility on the screen without needing a smart board. So we're kind of deferring that to see how it goes and get the wireless in place and get the projection systems and then see if there still is a need to have smart boards.
A need to have any smart boards?
No, I think there are some teachers that are using the ones that are installed very effectively, but there may be a classroom next door where the teacher is using a projection system and doesn't really want to have the smart board. And some of the PTAs are filling in as well. If there are some requests for smart boards, some of the PTAs are funding smart boards.
So if a given teacher does not feel the effectiveness of using a smart board and is using a projection system, is that smart board taken out of that teacher's room and put into another room for a teacher that maybe would feel more effectiveness to use a smart board, or it just stays there and not really is used?
Well, we're strongly encouraging teachers who have smart boards to use them because if they have the training, they can use it. But, it's expensive to take a smart board out of a classroom and move it, so it might be more effective to move the teacher than to move the smart board. So we're trying to match up teachers who want to use smart boards with the smart boards that exist. But moving smart boards around the district is very expensive. So we're trying not to do that, because that's not a real effective use of our technology funds.
Okay. So
That
for right
answers your
now,
question.
the smart board program is on hold?
Correct.
Yes.
But we also, and I've got some inquiries from PTAs who wish to contribute smart boards, and we're accepting of that. There's no prohibition against a PTA that wants to add a smart board or two, knowing full well that down the road, if the district does decide to put smart boards in a given school, that they have, supplanted that funding. So there's a risk there.
Is that a change in policy, that whole PTA funding of smart boards? Because I thought district-wide there was some pullback on that, with the thought that you may have a more wealthy part of a community or wealthier school that could contribute a lot more than another school, and there would be an inequality within the program.
Well, there's massive inequality now.
Okay. In what way?
Well, that the installed base of smart boards last year when I looked at it ranged from 25% in some schools to 75 or 80% in others, and it wasn't necessarily based on wealth. It often had to do with a renovation project at the time. Remember, there were times when under renovations or new schools, smart boards went in. So it was sort of happenstance. there was some of the PTAs when I first got here were under the impression that they were banned from donating smart boards to the schools based on board policy, and that was not true. So we did revise the administrative regulations around gifts to clarify that if you're going to donate a smart board, any technology to the school system, wasn't a smart board specific, that it needed to be something that, you know, had to fit some criteria. Had to be something the district could support, had to cover the full cost. You couldn't just give us a smart board and not pay for installation, and so forth. If and when we decide that we believe that every school, every classroom needs a smart board, we will fill in where the gaps are. But right now, I guess the best way to put it is the way you put it is, it's still on hold.
Okay, so am I correct in, I don't want to restate your words, but PTAs are allowed to give whatever type of technology they want to the school as long as it meets certain criteria, like paying for installation costs, so the district's not held, put on the hook for that stuff and whatever.
Correct.
But doesn't that promote an unequal providing of your program, potentially? I mean, maybe, what happens if you had one, for example, let me just take one technology. What happens if you had one school district that had an extremely well-funded PTA, and they decided to buy an iPad for every kid in the school system and pay for programming for that? And their scores start going up.
Yeah.
Would that create a problem for you?
I'm not sure that would qualify because the upkeep that would be associated from our end of all of that individual technology might knock it out of the box as fitting the guidelines, because one of the provisions is that we have the capability of supporting this. Smart boards don't take the same kind of don't do it. Right now, the PTAs, and it hasn't been a while, we haven't had large donations where this has been a problem. Many of our PTAs are well-funded, and they pick and choose where they put their money. But at this point, I don't. It's really just a kind of out there hypothetical. We did take it on a case-by-case basis, I guess. It hasn't been an issue.
It just kind of concerns me when we're trying to, for the same taxpayer, provide the same services and the same programming.
Right.
And you guys are very stringent about providing your curriculum across the board the same, that there could be a situation where you might not be providing it the same.
If it created a massive inequity, we probably wouldn't let it happen.
Okay. I have another question in regard to the high school sports costs that are on page 87. What are the reasons, this is in two separate line items, one under Fairfield Ludlow High School and one under Fairfield Ward High School at the top of the page under the sports costs. For Ludlow, they're going up 18%, and for Ward, they're going up at 15%. Is this based on the number of students that are going to be, because the sports teams, I presume, are going to be pretty much the same sports teams, right? Are we adding programs on?
No.
What's the reason for such high increases in those two areas?
Well, the principals, the headmasters, this is part of their allocation, so they're directing money in there. There were some cutbacks there in terms of some of the number of sports, some number of contests that we're going to get back in here. So I think there was some, the headmasters putting some of that back in. I don't know if we have any more detail than that.
It does seem a lot
There was
higher.
some, yeah, and there was some, we had cut some uniform money out as a one-time thing that they've put back in as well. It's not just about contests, but.
So is this increase catch-up in regards to
the uniforms and
uniforms
some-
from the previous year and making up some of the costs from the previous year?
Yes. I don't know. Jim?
That's all I have right now.
Go to Mrs. McCarthy Vahey.
Right. Yeah, the uniform cuts got, were difficult to swallow and couldn't just knock that thing way back permanently, so the headmasters reinstated the uniforms.
So it's a reinstatement of
Right.
something that was cut out?
Right. Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment about the smart boards. I've heard, I believe you said in the previous superintendent, in terms of smart boards, that one of the reasons that there is that variation, the 25 to 75%, is that the principals have chosen in their allocation to use those monies in different ways.
Did
and that's
previously,
one of
yes.
the reasons why
Yes.
that exists.
Previously, there was a technology allocation to each school, and some of the principals chose to use that, or an equipment and technology allocation. Some of the principals chose to use that on an annual basis for smart boards. Others didn't. That's no longer the case. All of technology is now funded centrally, and our goal is to bring equity where it doesn't exist, but it's not going to be able to be done in a short term because it's so vast.
Just another follow-up comment in terms of that issue of PTAs donating technology or any other items, services, programs for children. There are differences in our PTAs and what they're able to do. And I think Mr. Walsh raises a valid point that we need to be aware of that as a district, because we have neighborhood schools and we have differences in our demographics, as we know, at the schools in our district. So I think it's something we need to be sensitive to.
I agree.
And it's a valid issue. So just to comment on that. My questions, two specifically, one related to the elementary special ed staffing model and the changes there. And I know, just looking on page 137, it's the 9.2 teacher or FTE increase in teachers, and then the 13.6 decrease in paraprofessionals. And am I right in understanding that, just in terms of looking at unemployment, again, for the town, are we anticipating that those 13.6 positions are going to be absorbed elsewhere or not?
We believe they'll be absorbed elsewhere.
Okay. Another question related to the math, changes in the math. I believe that's on the next page. The secondary math support proposal. And I'm always happy to see support for math. I always tell my kids, everything comes down to math and numbers. I shouldn't have to tell this board that, right? That's what we do here.
It's appropriate. We're doing the budget.
Yes, exactly. At your January meeting, you mentioned that the math workshop model in ninth grade has been successful, and I'm wondering how you know that and what kind of measurements in terms of, what brings this forward, and how are you seeing the success and why this is being proposed?
I think we're looking at the number of kids who are in that program, some of whom catch up and are exited, student grades, another way of looking at that, how kids are doing in the regular course. So if they're taking Algebra 1 plus the workshop, how are they doing compared to the previous years when we didn't have the workshop model? The key here is that these kids are going to be moving on from Algebra 1 to Geometry and then to Algebra 2. Presently, there is no support for those kids in those courses. And so this extends that model up for the next 2 years. We actually have two forms of workshop model going on at the ninth grade level. We instituted one this year, which gives some students 5 days a week of support, essentially double math. And other students may only need 2 day a week support in math. What we're trying to do here is not lower the bar, keep the standards high, give the kids the support to reach it. And while it doesn't work for every child, it's really the only way we're going to get kids ready to, get these math skills down, is to give them more time with it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have about 1 hour left by our own rules of cutting off by 11. So I have a couple of questions for Mr. Brown, if everybody else is questioned that, I don't know. And then I want to wrap up with a couple of requests for information for myself, if I might. So Mr. Brown, who took ill, was kind enough to email me his questions. Some of them
Technology is getting us.
Yeah. Some of them have been covered. Many of them have been covered, but one of them, a couple of them I think are very relevant and haven't been covered. I think it was Mr. Brockfield who alluded to, or Mr. Stone, last year's audit and the discussion about losing the houses. And I think you addressed that.
Right.
And you also referred to your your document. That was, as I recall, the only one I recall seeing was kind of an initial review of the audit recommendations and your thoughts on them. Could we get an update on that? I think it's probably pertinent for these boards as well as the RTM to know what has been implemented and what hasn't been implemented.
Sure.
Relative to that audit. I think that'd be good information. And if not implemented, why they weren't implemented. I think the general public has a question on that sometimes. Another item that and I look at Mr. Mayor who came in, that we talked about a number of years ago when he and I were liaisons to the Board of Ed during the budget process, was actual benchmarking and comparing what we were spending per student per what other towns were spending. They used to be the DERG, and then it was the ERG. I don't know
Yep.
what it is, the BERG now. I don't know
Yep.
what it is. The UG, right.
Yeah.
But would love to see a comparison of our cost per student versus other towns at this point, and what's going on with us as comparison to similar towns.
Yeah, there's a sort of a data issue around that because the state has been very tardy with, that all comes from the state because the state does the calculation for us. And in fact, I went on the website last week to try to look some of that up, and the last year they had up there was 08, 09.
Yeah, that's pretty ugly.
They're so far behind on their data. So yeah, because there's really two. The comparison I think that's most apt for us is the Fairfield County districts because the cost structures are really the driver here. And if you could be a DRGB town in northeastern Connecticut, I mean, the whole game here is what your cost structure looks like, what your teacher contract looks like. And so I know the last I looked at it, if you looked at the Fairfield County districts, they're similar to us. We're real low on a per pupil basis. But that, we can get that data. Whatever the latest data is, I really think that's the best, comparison is the surrounding, the Fairfield County, catchment area, because that's really what drives the costs up, is Fairfield County.
As long as we include some of the districts that are similar to us.
Sure.
Some of the smaller districts, I know it's a little bit less relevant. But
Right, yeah, it's always, I guess, whatever story you want to tell, you can find a comparison to tell it.
Right.
Right?
Right, and that's why I think we need a broader cross-section, so
Yeah.
whatever you could do on that.
Yeah.
The other item, and this actually comes from myself, if I look at page 110, and it's the historical enrollment data, and it goes back very similar. One of the things that I like to look at, and I've looked at in the past, are our trend lines. And so I'm going to throw a couple of requests your way and then give you a compliment. So if you can go through the request, you'll get a nice compliment, I think.
Okay,
It's
sounds like a deal I can't refuse.
Yeah, there you go. So, over the last
Literally.
10 years, enrollment's gone up about 2,000 students, right? That's what this is telling me, which is roughly 20% or thereabouts, correct? Over 10 years?
Yeah, that looks about right, yep.
Yeah. Could we see similar number?
Actually, no, it would be 25%, because your denominator is the 8,000, not the 10,000.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. Better at math than I am. There you go.
So,
So, all right, so we-
it's the difference,
Exactly.
it's the difference divided by the,
Exactly. So,
right.
so there we go.
Okay, it's 25%.
Good. So here's what I'd like to see. Can we see the difference in staffing?
Sure.
And can we see the difference in actual costs?
Sure.
So the budget and the budget and the staff numbers as compared to the actual level of students. Now, I'm going to caveat that. I don't remember the year the second high school opened.
Right. You get,
Right.
yeah, it's 2004
Right.
that Ward opened, and that does skew everything. That's always one of the
Agreed.
problems.
So if we could do 10 years and do 5 years, we get
Yeah.
through that, right? So we
Yeah,
can
it's-
see what the
it's-
growth is over 5 years.
Well, you've got some other things. I mean, there were other schools that opened, right?
Yep. That's why I'm asking for it.
Right.
If it was easy, I wouldn't be asking for it.
Right. Better be a good compliment, right, right.
All right. So
The
for
numbers
your-
are there, how you interpret them is a matter of discussion.
Yeah. So somebody said it all comes down to math, right? Didn't I hear that?
Right.
earlier? All right. So for your compliment,
Okay.
here's your cookie.
Oh,
Page
jeez.
123. Right. One of the questions I'm always asked, walking around town when it's specific to your budget, is head count. Right. So rough numbers over a 2-year period, you're going up over 250 students, correct? Last year
Right,
and this year.
and this year, right.
Right. And your head count has gone down during that same period of time.
That's correct.
So I wanted to give you the compliment on that.
That was not by choice.
Well, but it's
Take the compliment.
Some of it was good management.
yeah. You're ruining such a good close.
I know. Thank you, Tom.
The other item is, that was good to see, is that the change, and again, if you look into the details, it gets a little bit murkier, but actually the increase in certified staff and the decrease in non-certified staff, which would tell you that some of your overhead is going down a little bit.
Right.
So I know these are statistics that I look at, and I know people in town have asked about it. So I think that's important to note and to call that out for you guys.
Thank you. We'll take the compliment.
Plus, you
Pam?
got a nice suit, Dave.
All right, all right. It's the best I could do.
So, so if we could get that analysis, that'd be great to see what the trend lines are and how
Chairman?
we're benchmarked. Yeah.
Most of the information requested is in the annual report of the town.
Yeah, I want to see that for the budget for next year.
It's in here and as provided by the Board of Education.
But not for next year.
Their staff in 2002 is 1158, last 2001, 1387.
Yep.
Goes forward.
Yeah, I want to see it together.
I'm sorry?
I want to see it together. I want to see the staff and the, what I'd like to see is one chart that shows the staff, the dollars, and the students all in
Dollars
one
are on
chart.
another page.
Right.
God. Now, the other point we should make is, if you recall, we changed the way we count staff when I came.
I'm sure you can footnote that.
Right. So I just want to, those.
So do I
there's-
need to take back the compliment if
Right.
you,
So I just want to say that,
No, but you're going to make me increase his bonus payment.
right, there you go. All right. Thank you for the compliment. We'll stop there.
That's a showstopper. What other questions or comments do people have as we wrap this up? Huh?
It's pretty hard to follow.
It is pretty hard to follow. So I waited till the end. Anybody have anything? All right, at this point, I think it's appropriate that we open it up to any public comment. Now, before we get started on this, I'd ask you to keep your comments brief. I'd ask you to refrain, if possible, given the lateness of the hour and the agenda, just repeating what others have said if you can. And I'd also just remind that we can't allow questions. So this isn't going to become a question and answer. You can come up and comment on things that you've heard, and perhaps that leads to a follow-up question from one of the board members either tonight or at the next session on the Board of Education budget. So if people could just realize that. Mr. Walsh, or do we have the microphone? Where's the microphone? Great. Tom, can we have him just come up right here?
Yep.
Right. Thank you for helping, Tom. So anybody who'd like to make a comment, please come on up on the Board of Education budget. I know. Hello. Please state your name and your address for the record.
Can I sing? Okay. Meredith McCormick, Fairfield Beach Road. You don't want to hear me sing. I'll skip through all the math stuff. I think we all understand. I think this is a pretty low percentage increase we're asking for, especially if we put in Mr. Tetro's proposed, lowering for the pension contribution. But one thing I didn't hear Dr. Title say tonight that I have heard him say in other budget meetings this year is when he was building this budget, for every single increase he put in, he tried to find an offsetting savings. So the afternoon office coverage in the elementary schools, the additional plumber, the custodial overtime increases were offset with savings from big items like the electrical costs and the lower employee contribution to health care. But they're also offset by little things, like favorable health insurance claims, lower legal fees we've been seeing, and a preschool program that's made more money than expected. So anyway, I think the Board of Ed has proposed a well-thought-out budget in line with today's economics times. Please support it as is. Please do not make any more cuts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any cut.
Good evening.
Carolyn Richmond, District 1, RTM. As a former high school teacher, one of the things I wanted to comment on is that it is important to let teachers prioritize what they feel is useful. The overhead projector I used to use because I could teach the physics of a curveball by simply connecting it to the computer and letting the kids see the actual pitches and make that, and then teach how you do it. So for that respect, I do believe that I like the idea of the overhead projectors because it gives the teachers a whole lot more flexibility because there is so much out there on the internet, and that way if you don't have individual computers in the classroom for the students to work with, it's the way of being able to deal with the whole class. So I think that's, and if the teachers want to use it, then they'll use it. That's a big difference in using technology. The other thing, and I always go back to, is class size. I think there's a lot of evidence that says, to me, the most important area in developing children's learning is in the elementary school. And I know across the nation, every elementary school, they're trying to keep the classes, they'll say no more than 23. And that works sometimes, but that's a push for the elementary teacher. I have a problem, though, is when the elementary teachers are teaching more students than our high school teachers are. Being a former high school teacher, I still think that we can have larger high school class sizes. I know we can't because of contracts, and I know that we've made a great leap this year in the contracts, and I was really glad to see it. We just didn't go far enough, because high school teachers are quite capable of teaching more than 20 students in a classroom. And the last thing is just from my constituents. We had a town hall meeting last Saturday. We had over 50 people. And the main thing they kept telling us is, please do not increase our budget. Do not increase our taxes. We're having a hard time now. And so I said I would continue to express that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Suzanne Miska, 123 Rygate Road here in Fairfield. Okay, hold on. Like that? Okay. Basically, my concern is, although it was very nice to see that the pension numbers were coming in less than what they have in the past, it was the timing of that coming out. The fact that the Board of Ed budget was already submitted to the First Selectman's office, and then the decrease was effected after the budget had been decided. I'm surprised that there wasn't a recall back to the Board of Ed to make them look at it again, to make sure there was nothing else that might need to be installed that was not looked at because of the fact that the budget was $800,000 greater than it appeared. There was a discussion for world language. Maybe that could have been put in, maybe it wouldn't. But I'm just surprised that the timing of things, that pension number could not have been provided back to the Board of Ed in a more timely fashion. And this is the first year that the decision to come up with a lower pension number after the pension board met at the beginning of February, that number was not provided back to the Board of Ed in not a more timely fashion, and that they were not given, at least I don't know if they were or they weren't, a chance to recall and look back and see. Library, media center at the high schools are suffering, and the superintendent, in fairness, did his best to come up with a tight budget. The fact we're $800,000 less, maybe we could have put back another library attendant. Who knows? But that's not an option now given because the budget's already down by $800,000, and you're voting on a budget that's already been prepared. Thank you.
Thank you.
Leanne Ratner, Winnipogue Drive. I am a PTA Council President, and I just wanted to thank you all for your cooperative effort in putting this budget together, for the clarity of information, for your thoughtful questions this evening and from other evenings as well, and also for the fiscal responsibility that I think that this budget is showing. The PTA does support this budget, and we encourage you to support it as presented as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go to Mr. Tetra, who's asked for a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Just to clarify, one of the things we did differently this year, rather than just updating the pension numbers as is typical and typically giving us a report in a January timeframe, there was an experience study done that this board was aware of certainly, and the pension board requested, where we go back and test the assumptions and look at what has taken place. That experience study was given, finished in the latter part of January. Quite frankly, we hadn't expected dramatic changes at that point, but we saw them. And as soon as we saw the dramatic changes, we called for a special meeting of the pension board in order to get that information into the budget. The pension board met on February 8th. That was after the Board of Ed had gone to press and had voted on their budget. It frankly was after the town was scheduled to go to press on our budget. And as was related to this board earlier, the budget books were held up close to 2 weeks while we were able to look at what that, to allow the pension board to vote, identify which assumptions they wanted to base the revised estimates on, and to enable us to incorporate those into our system. So I think that fortunately we were able to get it in. It certainly wasn't intentional to hold it up that late. But it did come through, and in this case, it did save the taxpayers money going through by allowing the pension adjustment to be made on both the town side as well as the Board of Ed side, and also ripple through to some of the OPED costs that you'll, and allowed us to lower that cost in the budget too, all designed to help keep our costs under control.
Thank you. Okay, we're at this point back to board members. Any other comments on this budget right now? Seeing none, we'll go to the private school bus transportation contract. Mr. Hiller, that's, which budget book is that in? Yep, what page number? I'm sorry. Sorry to put you on the spot. Yeah, and I wasn't, I think you guys are-
137 of the,
Yeah, I
starting on
think,
page
Dave, do you need to
137 of
stay
the
for
town
this?
book.
I might stick around just in case there's a question.
Okay, I want to, before we go to it, though, because I thought you might need to stay for the private bus transportation contract, but I want to thank the members of the Education Administration. Dr. Title, I want to thank the Board of Education on our behalf for the time and effort that went into this budget, the time and effort that went into the presentation, and for your hard work. So, as Mr. Kiley pointed out, I want to thank Mr. Monsell for the redesign of the budget book. It was very helpful, and I think that showed through the conversation tonight. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mr. Hiller? We have a page number.
It commences on page 137. These figures have basically been provided by the Transportation Department of the Board of Education. Mr. Fickey is here if there are specific questions.
Okay, so it's page 137 in the town side budget book. Budget number 2531.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm getting a little bit of a headache, yeah.
That light's been in my eye all night.
Okay, are there any questions, comments, concerns on this budget? There's a reduction here of about 57,000 compared to the approved last year. Anything? No? All set? You guys?
Yeah.
Mr. Walsh? Mr. Tetra, all set? Okay, well, I guess we're done with this budget. So thank you very much. All right, we have to go to, is there any, yeah, thank you, Mr. Bolito. Is there any public comment on the private bus school transportation contract? Seeing none, we'll head over to Health and Welfare Services. This is under Health and Welfare is on 219, I believe.
And Ms. Leonardi could perhaps address that. if
Yes,
there's any
thank you.
questions. Again, this is administered primarily by the Board of
Yes, and is the department number incorrect on this, just to make sure?
11030, commencing on page 139.
Okay.
As for
Where does that number come from? Because on our book here, it says 6010.
He's looking at the calendar.
Okay, so it's 60.
Number is incorrect.
Yeah,
Update your number.
yeah.
That's the old number.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay.
This is basically providing health and welfare services for students within the town of Fairfield
Okay.
at the private and religious schools.
And the budget increase is 1.22%.
No, 0.54%, 158,046.
Page 141?
Wait, I'm on,
219, run health and welfare.
Page 141.
Page 141 is the number.
page 141. That's what's confusing.
Yeah, we've
We have
decided
two-
to name, give the same name to multiple departments to kind of help us with printing costs.
Okay, so no, now this matches. Got it. Okay, 0.54% or roughly $900 difference here.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any questions, comments on this budget? $900?
I'm going to refrain.
Anything here? Seeing none, we'll go to the public. Any questions or comments on this budget? $158,000. Providing instructional supplies, testing, and teaching materials. Health and welfare services, nothing. All right, seeing none, we'll go to the public, nothing. Back to the board, nothing. Do I have a motion? Mr. Brockfeld, seconded by Mrs. Gaffney. All in favor of adjournment? Opposed? Accept? Everyone, thank you for a very productive evening. We appreciate the time.